Hey guys, tonight we're heading straight into a world where it rains so hard and so often that soggy socks might as well be a birthright. I'm talking constant drizzle, sideways sheets, surprise downpours, the kind of rain that laughs in your face when you dare to wear cotton. You've just stepped into the Pacific Northwest during late fall, somewhere between what you thought was a mild shower and what feels like Mother Nature trying to drown your optimism. No umbrellas, no modern rain gear, just you, endless rain, and the very real possibility that your next step might land in a puddle that's deeper than your will to keep going. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, tell me what city you're in, and what time it is right now in the comments. Are you tucked in under warm blankets or hiding from the cold in a makeshift pillow fort? Either way, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your feet squelch with every step. It's not even funny anymore. The forest is soaked, thick with cedar and fir trees, and every branch seems to drip just a little more than it should. You look around and try to imagine how anyone could have survived this kind of endless deluge, let alone thrived. But here's the twist. Not only did native tribes survive here for thousands of years, they managed to stay dry, warm, and honestly, pretty stylish. Let's set the scene. You've landed smack in the homelands of the Coast Salish, Haida or Tlingit peoples. Pick a name, the region is packed with cultures that evolved right into the arms of relentless rain. And you're going to have to learn fast because the weather isn't letting up, and the crows above you are cackling like they know you're hopeless. They probably do. You stumble toward a wooden structure, low-slung and smoky. This is a longhouse, one of the most impressive answers to the rain problem you'll see. Wide cedar planks make up the outer walls, overlapping like shingles designed to shed water while locking warmth in. No nails, no screws, just smart, centuries-old joinery. You duck inside and instantly feel the difference. The air is thick with smoke from a central fire pit, but it's warm, dry even. You blink away the fog in your eyes and realise these people knew exactly what they were doing. And then the kicker, nobody inside looks particularly soggy. You glance down at your own waterlogged clothes and feel instantly ridiculous. Around you, people are dressed in thick, layered garments made from softened cedar bark, mountain goat wool, even tightly spun dog hair. Yep, you heard that right. Dog hair. But we'll get into that later. The point is, everything they wear seems designed not just to repel water, but to laugh in its face. You ease closer to the fire and someone hands you a chunk of smoked salmon. It's warm, oily, and, blessedly, dry. As you chew, you catch snippets of stories passed around the circle. Rain spirits, flood myths, a tale about a boy who turned into mist. Every story punctuated by the sound of raindrops slapping against the roof like an angry drummer with no sense of rhythm. Historically speaking, this region averages over 100 inches of rainfall a year. That's more than double what Seattle gets today. And unlike your modern rainy days, these came without plastic ponchos or indoor heating. So how did they manage? Here's one historical nugget to keep in your pocket. The cedar tree was considered the tree of life by many Northwest tribes, and for good reason. They used it for everything: shelter, tools, clothing, even baby diapers. The inner bark, when pounded and softened, could be woven into waterproof clothing. Not water-resistant, waterproof. Imagine walking around in a bark hoodie that somehow doesn't chafe. It's not magic, it's science, mixed with deep ecological knowledge. And here's a fun fringe fact to make you raise your eyebrows. Some groups even made their own natural glue from fish bladders to seal leaks in canoes and clothing seams. Fish, bladders. You can't make this stuff up. It worked disturbingly well. But not everything is settled history. There's still debate among scholars over how much of the cedar craft was strictly functional versus ceremonial. Did everyone wear these bark capes all the time? Or were they reserved for elders, dancers, or rainy rituals? Some argue that what we call daily wear might have actually been closer to what we'd think of as formal attire, like showing up in a tux to take out the trash. Others insist the tech was so effective it was used constantly. Back in the longhouse, someone tosses another log on the fire and you finally notice. The fire pit is slightly sunken, the smoke vent perfectly centered overhead. The engineering is flawless. Smoke rises, heat stays low. You shift your feet, suddenly aware of how cold your toes are, and someone points to your boots with a smirk. Yeah, those soaked-through sneakers aren't impressing anyone. You learn fast. Tomorrow you'll strip bark, scrape it, dry it, and start weaving. Because if you're going to make it through this eternal wetness, you're going to need your own rain armour. Until then, you sit back, stomach warm with food, eyes heavy from the firelight. Outside, the rain keeps falling. Inside, you finally start to feel dry. Morning arrives with no ceremony, no sunlight, just the same steady drip, drip, drip on the longhouse roof, like a metronome set to Mood Destroyer. You step outside and immediately regret it. The rain has shifted from a lazy drizzle to something more committed. A full-blown downpour with wind thrown in like a petty insult. You blink, already soaked, and remember that today's mission is survival. Step 1. Learn how to make cedar bark clothing before your toes turn permanently to raisins. You squelch your way over to a covered work area where 2 elders are stripping long curls of bark off a fallen cedar log. The bark isn't just peeled and worn like a costume. Nope, it's got to be pounded until it's soft enough to weave. One elder hands you a strip and gestures toward a flat stone. You hammer awkwardly, splintering your piece almost immediately. They don't say anything, just laugh a little, softly, but with the distinct tone of, "This one's going to need some help." Cedar bark is harvested in late spring or early summer when the sap runs and the tree gives it up easier. What you're working with has already been dried and stored, waiting to be turned into capes, skirts, and hats. The fibres are surprisingly strong. Once softened, they become almost cloth-like, and when woven tightly enough, they shed rain like a duck's back. Speaking of ducks, you spot a child nearby wearing what looks like a poncho made from something feathered. Turns out it's literally duck skin, feathers and all, sewn together to trap heat and wick water. You blink again. Suddenly your water-resistant windbreaker back home seems like a toy. The rain falls harder now, almost sideways. But the elders don't flinch. One of them throws a cedar bark cape over your shoulders, and you feel the weight settle like a blanket. It's heavy, sure, but the rain just rolls off. It's not exactly cosy, but compared to your soaked-through clothes, it's divine. The cape has a distinct scent. Woodsy, rich, a little smoky. You wonder if they all smell like this, or if yours was hung too close to the fire for too long. Cedar bark garments were usually worn layered, often over inner linings of woven wool or animal hair. The outer shell, this bark cape of yours, is stiff but breathable. Some designs have fringe or flared shoulders to help the water drip off instead of down your back. Others are styled with slits for movement, or hoods built from folded bark or woven reed. You're beginning to see the logic. You're also beginning to feel drier. Historically, Coast Salish and Tlingit peoples, among others, perfected these techniques over generations. Women often did the weaving and fibre prep, their hands moving with a kind of speed and precision you couldn't hope to mimic in 100 years. The garments weren't just for protection. They told stories, displayed clan symbols, and in some cases warned others of your status. A cedar bark cloak could be practical armour or spiritual regalia, or both. And here's your weird fringe fact of the day. Some of these rain capes were intentionally stiffened using, wait for it, chewed salmon skin. Not exactly the kind of textile innovation your fashion designer cousin brags about, but hey, it worked. The salmon skin added a layer of oiliness and durability, and once dried, it made for an impressively water-repellent coat. Smelled fishy, sure, but that was sort of the point. Function over fragrance. Now you might be wondering, was cedar bark really enough in freezing rain or mountain snow? Scholars are still hashing that one out. Some believe cedar clothing was more common in warmer wet seasons, while in colder climates, animal hides and furs took over. Others argue that multi-layered cedar systems, combined with wool and bear grease treatments, yes, we'll get to that, were fully functional even in icy temps. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle, and likely varied tribe by tribe, season by season. By now, your hands are aching from pounding bark. Your first attempt at weaving is less than stellar, more of a bark blob than a wearable garment, but you're trying, and that counts for something. One of the elders finally helps you salvage a usable section and shows you how to start wrapping it around your shoulders with a bark cord tie. The final look is, honestly, kind of epic. You catch your reflection in a pool of rainwater, half wizard, half cave explorer, all waterproof. The rain, of course, hasn't let up, but now, wrapped in this traditional armour, you no longer feel like a soggy tourist. You're starting to blend in, just a little. And blending in is important because the rain isn't just weather here, it's a character in the story. It shapes everything, the people, the clothes, the homes, even the music. Out here, rain isn't an inconvenience, it's an identity. You trudge back toward the longhouse, bark cape dripping but body dry. Inside, you hang the garment near the fire on a carved cedar rack. That's another trick. Always keep your gear dry when you can. Mold is real, and nothing makes you feel like a swamp creature faster than a mildew-slick cape. You sit down, wring out your socks, again, and accept a cup of something warm made from boiled roots and herbs. It tastes like earth and smoke and comfort. Outside, the sky hasn't changed. It's still a sheet of cold grey, but now you're ready for it. Maybe not thriving yet, but definitely not losing. The rain hasn't stopped. Not even a little. You wake to the sound of it pattering against the longhouse walls, a constant background hum, like a lullaby you never asked for but now can't sleep without. The smoke inside curls lazily above the fire pit, rising through the central vent like it's been doing this since the dawn of time, which, honestly, it kind of has. You sit up, your cedar bark cape hanging nearby still dry, still smelling faintly of campfire and tree sap. Today, you're invited to spend more time inside the longhouse itself, to learn how it works, how it breathes, and how a building made from giant wooden planks can stay warm and dry through 1,000 storms. It's dark in here, but not unpleasantly so. Light filters in through cracks through the open smoke hole and through gaps near the doorway. Everything inside is shaped by fire and weather. You can feel the years pressed into the timbers, and the air carries a scent of wood smoke, dried herbs, and something meaty simmering in a clay pot nearby. This structure isn't a quick shelter thrown together for a weekend of bad weather. It's built to last generations. The beams are carved from old-growth cedar, fitted together without metal, without glue. Just wood on wood, smoothed and balanced with precision. No drafts, no leaks. The floors are slightly raised in places, dry platforms that stay out of the splash zone. Around the perimeter, people sit, work and sleep in family areas demarcated with woven screens or hanging mats. Your guide points out a clever detail. The central hearth is slightly sunken. That traps the heat, lets it rise slowly, and keeps the floor warm without lighting the whole place on fire. A helpful feature, honestly. The smoke floats upward and out, guided by careful architecture, not luck. Someone adds cedar to the fire and the flames crackle with that sharp, citrusy smell only cedar can give. The warmth spreads like a wave. And here's the kicker. The smoke isn't just for heat, it's also for drying. Everything in here, blankets, clothing, baskets, even salmon strips, is slowly dried and preserved by the ever-present fire. You stretch your hands toward it and realize that in a place where rain never stops, smoke becomes your best friend. It's the invisible umbrella. It chases off mildew, preserves wood, and keeps your bones from turning to pudding. Historically, these longhouses weren't just homes. They were social centres, ceremonial spaces, winter strongholds, and memory banks. The walls were decorated with clan symbols, woven art, and sometimes even carvings that told stories to anyone who could read them. Multiple families might live here, each with their own space but sharing warmth and resources. Imagine Thanksgiving dinner, but all winter long, with slightly more dried herring and way fewer awkward political debates. And here's your quirky tidbit of the day. Some tribes even train their dogs to help keep the interiors clean, not just by chasing vermin, but by licking up scraps. Yes, you heard that right. Living, breathing Roombas. Trained house dogs with a job. It's efficient and possibly adorable, depending on how you feel about damp dogs licking floors. Back to the practical stuff. As you watch someone hang a robe near the fire, you notice the spacing. It's strategic. Nothing too close to catch a spark, but close enough to benefit from the heat. Everything is hung in layers. Heavy garments further out, delicate weavings closer in but higher up. The airflow dries them slowly, avoiding warping or shrinkage. This isn't a toss it on the radiator and hope for the best situation. It's a drying choreography. Some modern historians debate just how smoke-dependent these homes really were. Could people live in here for months at a time without coughing their lungs out? Were there multiple vents? Did they rotate fire duty to avoid smoke fatigue? Archaeologists and oral histories offer different answers. Some say the ventilation was so advanced that smoke rarely settled low. Others claim your eyes would sting for weeks, but it beat freezing to death. The debate continues, probably somewhere in an underheated academic office full of wet umbrellas. Meanwhile, you watch as someone walks in from the storm, water dripping from the brim of a woven bark hat shaped like an upside-down funnel. Brilliant design. The water runs off the wide brim instead of down the wearer's back. You're told these hats were often personal, sometimes passed down, and occasionally decorated with painted designs that told you exactly who you were dealing with. It strikes you then, everything here, from the clothing to the architecture, is about relationship. With the rain. With each other. With the land. You don't beat the weather. You learn to move with it, to bend like the cedar branches in the storm. You make smoke your ally. You dry things in layers. You sleep near the fire, your feet wrapped in wool, your head under a woven mat that catches any stray drips. The longhouse is humming now, in a quiet, living way. A toddler squeals as they chase a dog. Someone sharpens a blade near the firelight. A grandmother tells a story you can't understand, but her voice carries warmth anyway. The smoke spirals upward, as if it's joining the rain above in some kind of eternal dialogue. You lean back against a carved post, the wood smooth from countless hands. Rain taps on the roof, insistent, but outside. Out there, not touching you. For the first time since you arrived, you don't feel like the rain is winning. You feel like maybe, just maybe, you've joined the team that's been beating it quietly for centuries, with fire, fibre, and a very clever roof. You're halfway through drying out, physically at least, when someone sets a small clay bowl in front of you. It looks like soup, or maybe stew, but it smells like fish and firewood. You lean in and catch the oily shimmer on the surface, a sheen thick enough to glisten even in the dim light. It's grease, rendered fat. Fish fat, maybe bear, maybe seal, you're not sure. But everyone around you is rubbing it on their hands, their arms, even into their garments. Someone dips a finger and gestures toward your face like, "You should probably try this." You hesitate, then shrug, when in soggy Rome. The moment it touches your skin, you get it. The fat is warm, almost buttery. It sinks into the cracks of your weather-worn hands and leaves behind a slick barrier, one that actually repels water. You rub it into your forearms, then down your neck, surprised by how quickly your skin drinks it in. The smell is intense, earthy, animal, but not unpleasant. It smells like you're protected, and in a way, you are. Here's a fact that might make you rethink your skincare routine. Native peoples in wet regions routinely used animal fat not just for food, but as waterproofing. Not just on skin, on clothing, tools, and sometimes even baskets. Bear grease was a favourite. Seal oil, where available, was equally valued. Mixed with ash or plant matter, it could become a thick paste that kept cold water and biting wind out. It wasn't fashion. It was survival. You're handed a bundle of something wrapped in tightly woven grass matting, slick with the same fat. Inside, tools, bone knives, hide scrapers, twine, all dry, perfectly preserved. Someone demonstrates how the bundle's seams are sealed with a mix of fish glue and fat. Basically natural Tupperware, but kind of cooler and smellier. Back outside, the rain hasn't relented, but now, when a drop lands on your skin, it beads up and rolls off. You raise your arm like you're admiring a new tattoo, watching the water fail to soak in. For the first time since arriving, you don't feel like the rain owns you. You're still soaked everywhere the grease hasn't touched. But hey, it's a start. Historical records show that in regions like the Pacific Northwest and Arctic coasts, animal fats were absolutely vital. They preserved not only tools and gear, but also skin from cracking, blistering, or straight-up freezing. Before waterproof fabrics existed, fat was the barrier. Some tribes even mixed it with powdered clay or crushed shell for colour and added protection. Want red-tinted waterproof sleeves? You got it. Want a ceremonial look that also keeps your arms dry during a thunderstorm dance? There's a grease for that. Now for today's odd but true side note, there are accounts, though rare, of people waterproofing parchment scrolls with fish oil. Not a widespread practice, but certain ceremonial or record-keeping items, like inscribed bark or hide, were sometimes treated with fat to keep them from disintegrating in wet seasons. So yes, even your grocery list could stay dry if you greased it up properly, but not everything about the use of animal fat was purely utilitarian. There's still academic debate about how much was practical and how much was symbolic. In some traditions, applying bear grease wasn't just about keeping warm, it was a connection to the spirit of the bear. a transfer of strength and resilience. Some anthropologists argue that the line between sacred and practical was blurred in ways modern minds struggle to grasp. You didn't just wear the fat, you became part of the animal's legacy. Back inside the longhouse, someone is rubbing seal oil into a tunic made of woven cedar fibre and dog hair. Yes, dog hair again. We'll get there soon. The tunic, rough to the touch but impressively flexible, becomes glossier with each pass of the cloth. The oil changes it, makes it move like leather, water-resistant, wind-resistant, battle-ready. You get a sense that everything here serves multiple functions. A garment is not just a garment, it's a shield, a status symbol, a canvas. Fat isn't just fat, it's a sealant, a tribute, a survival hack. The layers of meaning pile up like the clouds outside, dense, hard to see through, but undeniably rich. Later, someone hands you a piece of smoked meat, possibly elk, though no one tells you for sure, and invites you to help with another chore, oiling the footwear. Woven moccasins made of shredded cedar bark and rawhide are drying near the fire. They're functional, but to truly withstand days of swampy trails and soaked forest floor, they need the fat. You kneel and dip your fingers into a container of rendered bear grease, working it into the seams of the shoes. It feels weird, then it feels meditative. Grease and bark, oil and wool, smoke and rain. The whole system is designed to beat the weather without fighting it directly. You're not putting up walls, you're becoming water resistant. Of course, some of it's messy. You catch yourself wiping your greasy hands on your pants, which are now both waterlogged and slick. A terrible combination, but no one laughs. Around here, that's just what it takes to stay warm, to stay dry, to stay alive. You're not the only one learning. A small group of children is being taught how to process fat, scraping hardened globs from a seal skin stretched tight over a rack. Their teacher speaks softly, repeating phrases as they work, teaching the language and the skill at the same time. Survival isn't inherited here, it's practiced. By the time night falls again, your hands are sore, your arms are slick, and your nose can pick out bear grease in a crowd of 10. You curl up near the fire, wrapped in a cedar fibre blanket that smells like smoke and pine, and realise that you're actually warm and dry. Not perfectly, but enough. And with rain still hammering on the roof like it's got something to prove, that counts as a win. You wake up to the same rain song, nature's eternal playlist on loop, and for once, it's not bothering you. Not really. You're warm, your cedar blanket is only slightly damp at the edges, and your greasy hands are finally starting to feel like part of the plan instead of part of the problem. But today's lesson is about the unsung heroes of survival in this climate. Animals. Not the kind you eat, though you're definitely still thinking about that smoked elk from last night. No, today is about materials. Specifically, how native peoples turned dog hair and duck feathers into rain-fighting armour that somehow didn't smell like a barn. Your first stop is a weaving shelter, partially covered, open air, and humming with quiet activity. The smell of cedar is still heavy in the air, but now it's joined by something muskier. Fur. On the floor are bundles of fibres, some coarse, some soft, all sorted by colour and texture. A woman motions you over and shows you what's in her hands. Tufts of cream-coloured fluff, almost too soft to be real. You reach out and, yep, that's dog hair. Clean, carded, and ready to be spun. Here's your historical curveball. Long before sheep were introduced to the Americas, many coastal tribes, especially the Coast Salish, kept woolly dogs. That's right. Dogs bred specifically for their thick, soft undercoats, used in weaving high-quality yarn for robes, blankets, and clothing. These weren't just scrappy camp mutts. These were pampered, sheared animals with carefully managed diets, and coats so lush you'd swear they were walking balls of fleece. Some tribes even kept them on islands to keep their bloodlines pure and their coats clean. You can't make this stuff up. It's like ancient farm-to-table meets dog show. The fibre was usually mixed with mountain goat wool when available, or even with plant fibres or bird down to create different textures and weatherproof qualities. The result? A fabric that was warm, breathable, and, when oiled properly, shockingly water-resistant. The dogs themselves, honoured, sometimes symbolically connected to spiritual beliefs, and definitely not allowed to roll in mud like the average Labrador. The weaving process is hypnotic. You watch as the woman spins the yarn on a simple drop spindle, her fingers moving with rhythmic ease. The resulting thread is strong, finer than anything you could produce even with modern tools. She knots it expertly and starts adding it to a nearly finished robe that already looks like it belongs in a museum. Thick, plush, and patterned with subtle zigzags made by alternating shades of grey and white fibre. Now for the fringe fact that'll make you blink twice. There's a surviving Coast Salish blanket made entirely from dog hair and dyed with local plants, still intact after more than a century. It's housed in a museum now, but it speaks volumes. This wasn't a gimmick. It was high-tech textile work for a world without synthetics. You turn your attention to another project happening nearby. A child stuffing something into a tight-sewn pouch. Feathers. So many feathers. At first you assume it's a toy or some ceremonial rattle. Then you realise what it is. A liner. A duck feather insert for a rain cape or bedroll. It's soft, dense, and squishes flat when compressed. Just like a down sleeping bag. Only this one's made from the plumage of dozens, maybe hundreds of ducks. Feathers, especially down, are naturally water resistant. Birds don't get soaked in the rain for a reason. They're built to shed water. Indigenous peoples took full advantage of this, crafting everything from pillow inserts to clothing padding to entire blankets using duck and goose down. Woven inside grass mats or animal skins, the feathers trapped warmth and bounced moisture away. It's like walking around inside your own thermos. And of course the outer layer mattered too. These feather liners were always used in combination with something tougher. Cedar bark capes, oiled leathers, or tightly woven reeds. You needed the whole sandwich. Feather insulation on the inside, water-repellent shell on the outside. Modern sleeping bag manufacturers would charge $300 for the same performance, and these people were doing it with stone tools and duck flocks. But not everyone agrees on how widespread feather-lined clothing really was. Some scholars argue that while feathers were used in bedding and ritual wear, the practical day-to-day garments leaned more on dog wool and cedar. Others say it depended on the tribe, the local birds, and the season. Some even believe certain feather garments were reserved for spiritual leaders or dancers during rain ceremonies, symbolic protection rather than full-body Gore-Tex. The debate's still out there, and the rain keeps falling in the meantime. You're handed a half-finished garment, a sort of tunic lined with soft down and backed with cedar fibre. It's surprisingly light and clearly made for movement. You shrug it on, expecting the usual wet shoulder, but nothing happens. The rain hits, beads, and slides off like it's been insulted. Your body heat stays in. You feel like a marshmallow wrapped in a cedar taco. It's kind of perfect. As you help gather stray feathers and stuff them into another mat, a story is shared. Spoken slowly, rhythmically, in the low tones reserved for something meaningful. It's about birds that taught humans how to survive the rain. A time when people were cold, and a goose gave up its feathers so they could live. There's no punchline, just the moral. Pay attention to the world. Everything's trying to help you if you just listen. You glance up as a duck flies overhead, completely unfazed by the storm. It glides like the rain is part of the air itself. You wonder how it feels to be that ready, that waterproof by design. Back in the longhouse, the fire is glowing low. Your duck feather tunic is hanging nearby to dry. Not that it's wet. You're sitting on a mat lined with dog wool next to a basket that probably took 6 weeks to make. Everything in here has a function, but also a story. And the story tonight is this. When the rain comes down without end, you don't run from it. You wear it, layer by layer, like armour borrowed from animals who've been surviving it longer than you've been complaining about it. The storm is still sulking in the sky when you step out again, wearing your newly acquired duck feather tunic like it's designer gear, because honestly it is. Your boots make a wet crunch against the mossy earth, but your legs stay dry beneath the hem of a cedar bark rain skirt. You're slowly learning the art of layering like the locals. Grease, fur, bark, feathers, nature's version of performance wear. But today, your attention shifts upward, not to the endless grey sky, but to the clever things people built to deal with that sky. Someone hands you a hood. At first glance, it's not much. Woven from spruce root and cedar strips, it looks like a cross between a basket and a hat. But when you put it on and step into the open, you immediately feel the difference. The rain hits the wide brim and slides off, away from your face, neck and shoulders. It's not just a hat, it's a portable roof. That's the trick. In a world where the real roof is always leaking, you bring your own wherever you go. You're guided toward a structure outside the main longhouse. a smaller shelter made entirely of cedar bark mats, lashed over a bentwood frame. It's a temporary lean-to, but you step inside and immediately feel the relief. No drips, no chill, just a warm fire crackling in the centre, and bundles of bark rolls stacked neatly in the corners. These mats aren't just for roofs. They double as sleeping mats, capes, ground covers, and even canoe liners. The mats are made by layering bark, then pounding, softening, and weaving it into flat panels. Each one is light enough to carry, but sturdy enough to block rain for days. The edges are sometimes sealed with resin or animal fat to keep water from sneaking through. And if one wears out, replace it. The forest provides. Reusability long before sustainability was a hashtag. And today you're going to help make one of these bark capes. You're handed a bundle of wet cedar strips and a blunt-edged bone tool to start scraping off the rough outer layer. It's slow work and your hands ache after just a few strokes. Across from you, a teenager has already finished 3 panels and is tying them together with cord made from twisted nettle fibre. Show off. But the moment the panels start to come together, you see the genius. The cape takes shape as a series of overlapping shingles, much like the longhouse roof. Rain that hits the surface doesn't soak in. It's guided down and off. Add a hood, and suddenly you're wearing a structure, not just an outfit. You slip one on, a little bulky, but surprisingly easy to move in, and test it under a tree branch funneling down water like a gutter. Not a drop gets through. And here's your dose of quirky brilliance. In some coastal communities, hoods and head coverings were shaped intentionally to resemble the beaks of birds or animal snouts, not just for flair, but as homage to the creatures that endured the same storms. Some designs even had painted faces or clan emblems. Function met identity, a walking roof and a walking story all in one. Of course, these woven hoods and bark capes weren't the only answer to the rain. Some tribes developed flexible reed hats, bent and twisted into conical shapes that deflected water with elegance. Others used broad fern fronds, layered and tied together for quick protection during foraging trips. The materials varied, but the concept was the same. Don't just wear protection, shape it to your life. There's debate among historians about how common these bark capes and woven hoods were in everyday use. Some argue they were primarily for travellers and hunters, not daily wearers. Others suggest they were worn regularly during long wet seasons, especially by those working outdoors or away from central shelters. The truth? Probably both. Regional variation was the rule, not the exception. What worked for a salmon fisher by the coast wouldn't work the same for a berry gatherer in the wet mountains. You're starting to see how every item around you has that dual purpose: shelter and symbol, utility and story. Even the way the capes are fastened, small loops of sinew tied to carved toggles, feels considered. Easy to tighten or loosen depending on the storm, easy to repair if something breaks. There's a low-tech sophistication here that your modern raincoat can't touch. Midday rolls in, which really just means the light goes from dim to slightly less dim. The rain gets heavier, then pauses, then starts again from a new angle, like it's experimenting with creative delivery methods. A group of kids runs by wearing mini versions of the bark hoods, laughing as they splash through puddles. You're told their play isn't just fun, it's training. Learning how to balance under a weighted hood, how to duck into cover quickly, how to keep one shoulder dry while using the other to catch falling rain into a container. Survival disguised as a game. Back at the shelter, someone shows you a pack made from bark and hide, its outer layer treated with sap to waterproof it. Inside, dry tinder, fire starter. In this climate, that's as valuable as food. It becomes clear that the bark capes and hoods aren't just about comfort. They're about preserving the tools that keep you alive. If your fire starter gets wet, if your bowstring rots, if your food pouch moulds, you're not just uncomfortable, you're in trouble. You adjust your hood again, noticing how the water runs off it and drips neatly onto the ground behind you. It's oddly satisfying. You don't feel invincible, but you don't feel fragile anymore either. You're carrying your own shelter now, layered in bark and grease and cleverness. And as the wind picks up and the forest darkens, you walk calmly beneath the trees, dry for the first time in what feels like forever, your own roof trailing behind you with every step. Your boots make a soft thunk in the mud as you step off the forest trail, but for once your feet stay dry. This feels like a small miracle, considering the number of puddles you've tromped through. You glance down, half expecting the usual sad squish of soggy socks and wrinkled toes, but no, just the faint creak of tightly woven fibres flexing under your weight. Today, the rain hasn't won. and that's because of your footwear. Welcome to the world of mud-proof foot power. Hand-woven moccasins and bark-bound shoes tough enough to survive endless rain, soft forest floor, and the occasional "what did I just step in" moment. It's not glamorous, but when you live where the ground is always either wet, wetter, or dangerously close to becoming a full-blown swamp, your feet matter more than most people realise. You're sitting now under the edge of a cedar lean-to, legs stretched out, while someone shows you the pieces of what will become your new favourite accessory. The sole is thick, multiple layers of softened cedar bark pounded flat and dry just right. The uppers are made from animal hide, slightly oiled with seal fat and sewn with sinew, so fine it looks like thread. No glue, no rubber, just materials from the land, engineered to survive it. The process of making these shoes is almost musical. Strips are braided, pulled, tensioned, woven. Every stitch matters. You try your hand at the lacing, and of course, yours looks like a confused basket. A child nearby glances at your work, then at your face, then helpfully takes it back to start over. Fair enough. Footwear varied hugely depending on the region and tribe, but in the wettest parts of North America, like the northwest coast, moccasins were specifically adapted to shed water and grip slick forest floors. They were often made with removable insoles, rolled grass, moss, or even shredded cedar fibre that could be replaced when damp. You needed traction, but also insulation. If the sole got soaked, your core heat drained out through your feet faster than you could say frostbite. And here's your quirky detail of the day. Some moccasins were built with raised patterns or textures on the soles, not for fashion, but for stealth. Yep, your shoes were the original ninja boots. Raised tread meant better grip and in some cases left misleading footprints to confuse trackers or spirits. Think of it like ancient camo for your feet. Your guide, a broad-shouldered elder with hands like weathered driftwood, explains the importance of constant maintenance. In this climate, even the best shoe doesn't last forever. You sit with them while they patch a pair of worn moccasins using spare hide and a sharpened bone needle. Every repair is done with care. There's no panic, no waste. Just another chance to reinforce something that's earned its place. Meanwhile, others are working on waterproof leg wraps, long strips of hide or fibre that spiral up the calf and tie off below the knee. These keep mud and water from sneaking in at the top of your moccasins and turning your ankles into cold swamps. Worn under a bark cape, they complete the rain defence armour. You try them on, and despite the rough look, they're surprisingly comfortable, secure, warm. There's scholarly debate about whether some of these shoes and leg wraps were worn exclusively in colder months or year-round. Some argue that in milder months people preferred going barefoot or using minimal sandals to keep movement light. Others suggest that even in summer, the rain demanded full coverage. The truth probably shifts with geography. What works for a coastal fisherman wouldn't cut it for someone hiking mountain trails in spring runoff. You follow a small trail with your newly crafted footwear, testing the ground. Mud grips. Stones give way. Roots try to twist your ankle, but don't succeed. Your feet stay dry. It's such a basic success, but it feels like you just unlocked a cheat code. You pass others on the trail, all wearing different versions of rainproof shoes. Some ankle high, some soft and low like slippers, some wrapped in woven bark that crackles faintly with every step. You pause near a fallen log, slick with moss, and crouch to examine a footprint left behind in the soft soil. It's faint, but not shapeless. An imprint of tightly woven sole texture, with just enough depth to show weight distribution. You realise this is not just footwear, it's a signature, a quiet record of who passed through and how they moved. Back at the shelter, people begin hanging their shoes on racks near the fire, not too close to burn, just close enough to dry. Stuffed with moss or bark, held upright with split sticks, each pair is treated with the care you'd give your best knife or tool, and for good reason. A bad fire can ruin shoes just as quickly as rain. Drying is an art form, a daily ritual of smoke, steam, and constant checking. You follow their lead, untying your leg wraps and hanging your moccasins just so. Your feet, pink and warm, thank you silently. Nearby, a young girl oils the soles of her boots with a flat stone dipped in fish grease. The smell is pungent, but it does the job. You watch her work, precise and calm, like she's been doing it since birth. Later you sit cross-legged beside the fire, your shoes steaming gently nearby, and listen to stories, some about great hunts, others about the spirit of the trail. One story lingers. It's about a pair of moccasins that walked from one world to the next, carrying a person's soul across a rain-covered land bridge. The point wasn't just to move, but to arrive dry. And as the fire flickers and your feet stretch out toward the warmth, you finally understand what that means. Your connection to the land isn't just under your feet, it's wrapped around them, shaped by every thread, every braid, every oily seam keeping the rain where it belongs, outside. You're getting used to waking up in a soft cocoon of cedar smoke and wool. The air inside the longhouse is warm, fragrant with burning wood, and free of that sharp wetness that waits just outside the door. You stretch slowly, legs still wrapped in last night's legging wraps, and glance toward your drying moccasins hanging on the rack like sleepy bats. They're ready for another day in the rain. You are too. Mostly. Today, you're going to learn how to build a dry world. Not just survive inside someone else's shelter, but understand how it's made, how a structure built centuries ago with no screws or sealants can stay upright, warm and weatherproof through 1,000 rains. You pull on your cedar cape and step outside, instantly greeted by the familiar hiss of rain on forest leaves. The world is dripping again, as expected. You're led to the edge of a clearing, where the frame of a new longhouse is under construction. It's skeletal for now, just a series of thick, peeled cedar logs laid out like bones in a ribcage. The builders move deliberately, hands calloused, shoulders bare despite the cold drizzle. Their tools, stone blades, bone chisels, and muscle memory. You try lifting one of the corner posts and immediately decide that you're more useful watching and carrying smaller things, like moss, or, bark. The structure starts with a deep understanding of place. This site wasn't picked at random, it's slightly elevated, away from standing water. The land beneath is layered with gravel and sand, allowing for drainage. Trees nearby offer windbreaks, and the orientation is deliberate, facing a direction that lets wind pass by instead of slam into it. This isn't guesswork. It's architectural wisdom passed down through time, based on what the land teaches you if you listen long enough. Once the posts are set, massive cedar planks, split not sawed, are laid across, fitted together like puzzle pieces. No nails, no metal fasteners, just tight grooves, wedges, and balance. When the rain hits them, the planks swell slightly, tightening the seal. It's self-correcting. The more it rains, the better it seals. A structure literally built to cooperate with the storm. The roof is steeply sloped, made from overlapping bark shingles that look like dragon scales. Each piece is hand-cut, stacked so water runs down and out, not in. They're weighted with stones in key spots to keep wind from lifting them. Inside, the ceiling is high enough to let smoke rise, but not so high that heat disappears into useless space. Every angle, every board has a reason. And here's the historical highlight. In coastal regions, longhouses could be massive, up to 100 feet long and 30 feet wide, housing multiple families and serving as communal hubs. They weren't just practical shelters, they were statements of identity and engineering. In some villages, the longhouse layout was carefully aligned with celestial events or tidal patterns, blending the spiritual with the structural. Now for your fringe fact. Archaeologists have found drainage trenches dug alongside ancient longhouse sites, tiny channels lined with bark and gravel to carry runoff away. Basically, early plumbing. You follow one such trench near the building site, watching how it quietly carries water off into the brush, keeping the foundation solid. It's the kind of detail that vanishes if you're not paying attention, but that makes all the difference between dry floors and muddy misery. You spend the morning helping prepare bark panels, stripping them with a curved blade and stacking them in neat piles. The bark is soaked when harvested but flexible, perfect for forming the outer layers of the house. You ask how long it takes for one of these homes to be completed. The answer, as long as it takes. Some take months, especially if the wood is carried from afar. Others go up faster with community help. The speed isn't the point, the quality is. There's a debate among scholars about how permanent these homes were. Some claim they were seasonal, erected in wet months and abandoned in dry ones when people moved to lighter shelters or travelled for hunting. Others argue many were permanent, lived in year-round with small additions and repairs made as needed. Oral histories suggest both are true, depending on the tribe, the season, and the purpose. Some longhouses were homes, others were ceremonial, some both. You step inside a finished one for contrast, its interior dim but dry. The floor is covered in woven mats and lined with fire pits. Smoke holes above are vented with clever louvers, adjustable panels that can be opened or closed depending on wind direction. Along the walls are storage racks, bed platforms and drying poles. Everything's modular, movable, adaptable to family size, weather, or a sudden group of guests arriving dripping wet with a deer in tow. In the corner, a set of blankets is carefully arranged. Dog wool, feather lining, and outer covers treated with bear fat. Someone tells you these aren't just for warmth, they're survival kits. If a storm takes the roof or a fire goes out, those blankets might be the difference between comfort and hypothermia. There's no electricity, no insulation, no space heaters, just design and fire and wisdom. And yet, this longhouse is more comfortable than half the rental cabins you've stayed in. It breathes, it holds heat, and it laughs in the face of rain. You step back outside and look at the half-built structure again, seeing it now as more than just logs and planks. It's a dry world, grown from a wet one. A house not built to defy nature, but to partner with it. The rain taps your hood gently, like it knows you're paying attention now. You're not hiding from it anymore. You're watching it shape the world, and watching people shape back. You're not exactly a nomad yet, but your cedar-lined moccasins are getting some serious mileage. The rain hasn't let up. It's shifted again, from a steady drizzle to a low mist that curls around your ankles like it's trying to be friendly. You've stopped fearing it. You've even started understanding it. And today you learn something new. Sometimes staying dry isn't about what you wear or build. It's about when you move. It begins with a gesture. One of the elders points to the ridge beyond the village and then to the sky, eyes narrowed as they watch the clouds. There's no calendar, no forecast, but everyone around you suddenly knows what to do. People start packing, tools are bundled, fire embers are tucked into bark pouches. It's time to move camp, not out of panic, just practice. Timing is everything. You follow as a group of families begins the process, moving through the forest with quiet efficiency. Nothing is rushed, but everything is purposeful. Some load gear into woven baskets worn like backpacks. Others roll sleeping mats into tight spirals and tie them off with spruce root cords. Children carry small bundles, their own tiny responsibilities in a centuries-old rhythm. This is Weatherwise migration in action, something most modern people forget existed. Tribes across the Americas, especially those in rain-heavy regions like the Northwest, the Southeast, or the swampy Northeast, didn't just react to the rain. They planned around it. They moved with it, danced between its cycles. They built seasonal camps in places chosen not just for food or game, but for their ability to shed water during different times of year. The site you're walking toward is higher ground. Not by much, but enough. A slope just steep enough to drain. A stand of trees arranged by nature and favoured by people. The canopy overhead naturally funneling rainfall away from the clearing below. This wasn't dumb luck. It was a science, passed down orally, memorised through stories about floods, storms, and the signs of a misbehaving sky. You help unpack at the new site, setting down mats and placing cedar bark panels into the beginnings of a temporary shelter. This camp won't be elaborate, just enough to ride out the next weather shift. Maybe a week, maybe a few days. No one says for sure. Everyone just reads the land, the trees, the wind. Historically, these migratory movements were woven into the lifeways of many native communities. The Salish people had known winter villages and summer gathering places. The Seminole in the Everglades moved between chickees, open thatched roof shelters elevated above floodwaters, depending on the rising swamp. Plains tribes followed bison, yes, but also rain patterns, ensuring dry grazing lands and safer travel. Knowing when to move was as critical as knowing how to build. And here's your offbeat, slightly amazing fringe fact. Some groups used floating markers, literal pieces of wood or tied reeds set in swamps or streams, to track water levels over time, like primitive weather stations. When the markers shifted a certain way or sank beyond a certain point, it signalled that flood season was close. That meant, pack up, move fast, stay dry. There's debate among scholars about just how much mobility was weather-based versus resource-based. Some argue that migration was mainly about following food, fish, berries, game. Others say water dictated more than we understand. Oral histories hint at patterns where the rain told people when to move and the animals told them where. It wasn't one or the other, it was a relationship with both. Back at the new camp, you help set up a lean-to made of bark mats and split logs. The fire is rekindled from the coals carried in the pouch, still glowing, thanks to a bundle of moss and resin keeping them alive. As the shelter takes shape, you notice how the whole structure angles with the wind instead of against it. Even the smoke from the fire knows which way to lean. By nightfall, the forest around you is thickened with fog. Rain spits down in fits, then sighs into mist again. But inside the shelter, your mat is dry. Your cloak is dry. Even your feet are holding strong. You hear the steady drop of water on leaves outside and realise that you're perfectly placed, just above the saturation line, just below the ridge's wind. The camp breathes with the rain instead of trying to dodge it. Nearby, someone begins to hum, a low tune with a rhythm that matches the drip of water outside. It's not a song for entertainment. It's a memory aid, a way to pass along knowledge about where to go when the river floods, what bird calls signal a break in the storm, how to read the moss when the sky's too dark to guess direction. You hum along clumsily, missing notes, but feeling the shape of something old and true. You settle in, pulling your dog wool blanket up to your chin, listening to the shelter creak and sigh like it's part of the forest. Rain still falls, it always does, but now you understand that staying dry isn't just about gear. It's about the choice to move, the wisdom to know when water's about to take back the ground under your feet. And sometimes, surviving the rain means following the animals, the trees and the clouds, not because you're running, but because you're in step with something bigger, something that's been here longer than maps or cities or forecasts. The rain taps on the bark above you like it's applauding your effort. You fall asleep in a shelter that wasn't here this morning, on ground that was wet but is now dry. Because you listened. Because you moved. You wake to the sound of frogs, not birds, not wind, not even the usual tap-tap of rain. Just frogs, croaking in a kind of offbeat harmony that makes it clear you've entered the swamp, or maybe the swamp entered you. Hard to say when you're wrapped in a fog so thick it blurs the line between air and water. And today, you're about to learn how people lived, not just through this kind of wet, but in it, by choice, and somehow stayed dry enough to make it look easy. You're deep in what would have been the domain of southeastern tribes like the Creek, Choctaw or Seminole. Land of marshes, cypress knees and bugs big enough to borrow your shoes. The rain here doesn't fall in predictable showers. It just sort of hangs. Humidity becomes a personality trait. You can taste the water in the air before your tongue even touches it. You squish along a trail that's more moss than soil, shaded by towering cypress trees, their bases swollen and flared like wooden bell-bottoms. The forest here grows from water, not around it, and yet you're about to meet people who not only stayed dry in this soggy world, they thrived. Your guide, barefoot and utterly unfazed by mud, leads you to what looks like a cluster of floating huts. But they're not floating. They're just elevated, built on wooden stilts. These are chickees, traditional Seminole dwellings designed specifically for swamps that don't know when to stop raining. The roofs are thatched with palmetto leaves, layered thick enough to shed torrential downpours while staying breathable in swamp heat. You climb the notched log ladder into one and instantly notice the difference. The air is still humid, but it moves. The raised platform allows breezes to flow underneath, keeping the floor dry and the bugs guessing. No walls, just a thatched roof and open sides. This isn't about hiding from rain. It's about staying dry within it. About building so the water goes around you, not through you. Construction here is quick, but intentional. The palmetto leaves are laid in overlapping rows, each angled to funnel rain down and off the roof's edge. In heavy storms, water might blow in sideways, but the floors, woven from split logs or flexible cane, drain fast and dry faster. There are no puddles, no mildew-soaked corners, everything has airflow. Even the sleeping mats are rolled and stored upright during the day, so they don't trap the moisture that clings to everything like a jealous ex. And here's a weird but brilliant fringe fact. In some swamp communities, people used floating gardens, raised beds set on rafts or mounds of soil woven with reeds, to grow food in flood-prone areas. These mini-islands were rainproof not because they avoided water, but because they floated with it. Imagine harvesting squash from a raft while fish dart below your feet. Not your typical backyard. You sit cross-legged in the chickee while someone prepares a drink made from roasted corn and roots, sweet, smoky, and grounding. Your host explains how people here didn't just deal with rain, they adapted their entire rhythm around it. Cooking was done low to the ground, but always under cover. Tools were stored in hanging baskets, suspended from roof beams so floodwater couldn't reach them. Children learned young to move barefoot through muddy trails with the kind of grace you've only seen in deer. They watched the water instead of fighting it. There's an ongoing debate among anthropologists about how permanent swamp dwellings like chickees were. Some insist they were temporary, seasonally rebuilt as families moved through wet and dry cycles. Others point to the sturdiness of the designs and suggest that some were inhabited for long stretches, even years at a time. Oral histories tend to lean toward fluid use. Structures moved or rebuilt depending on the weather's moods. The only constant was adaptation. You follow a family down a narrow causeway, a raised path of packed earth and shell that snakes through the marsh like a lazy alligator. On either side, swamp grass shimmers in the rain, and frogs launch themselves into murky water with joyful plops. You reach another structure, this one more enclosed, built for storms. Walls woven from cane and daubed with mud. It smells earthy, alive. Inside, baskets of dry goods hang from the rafters, and the central hearth glows low and steady, smoke slipping through a thatch gap in the roof. Despite the humidity, nothing is damp. Tools are wrapped in hide or bark, hung high or buried in raised caches. Floor mats are flipped and aired regularly. Even in a world where water seems to pour from the sky and rise from the ground, people here figured out how to keep their lives dry enough to thrive. You step back outside, your feet coated in thin mud but still dry inside your swamp moccasins, stitched with care, layered with inner padding, and treated with a slick mix of bear fat and resin. It's not glamorous, but you're not slipping, and your toes aren't shrivelling. That's more than most tourists could say. As dusk falls, the swamp takes on a glow, soft, golden, reflected in pools of still water. The rain has eased into a whisper. Mosquitoes buzz, but a smoky fire near your shelter keeps them at bay. The chickee behind you stands like a defiant umbrella, dry and open and welcoming. You sit down beside the fire, sipping another cup of roasted corn drink, and listen to the water sloshing gently beneath the floor. This isn't a place you escape. It's a place you join, carefully, thoughtfully, on stilts. And just like that, you realise the key to staying dry in endless rain isn't always covering up or building higher walls. Sometimes it's knowing where to place your floor, or how to let the breeze carry the wet away, or how to weave a roof that lets the rain fall around you like a story you've already heard before, and no longer fear. The rain returns with a little more enthusiasm tonight, pounding on the thatched roof above like it just remembered it has a job to do. You're curled up on your raised mat in the chickee, belly full and feet dry, but it's not the weather keeping you awake. It's the quiet grumble in your stomach that started just after sunset. Not hunger exactly, but a kind of internal chill, like your body knows it's wet season and wants backup. Something dense, something greasy, something warm-blooded and fatty. Tonight we dive into cold and wet survival diets. Those unglamorous but genius menus built for people who spent months in the rain, with no central heating, no microwaves, and definitely no protein bars. You pull your blanket tighter as your host begins preparing a midnight snack. And this is no granola. This is pemmican, the original power food of the wet wilderness. You watch the process. Dried meat, usually bison, deer, or salmon, pounded into fibrous shreds, mixed with melted fat and sometimes mashed berries. It's all pressed together into a dense, greasy brick. Not pretty, but incredibly practical. High in calories, shelf-stable for months, and exactly what your rain-damp body's begging for. The fat acts like insulation for your organs, the protein helps rebuild what the cold wears down, and the berries add just enough sugar to trick your brain into thinking you're eating something joyful. You bite into a chunk and instantly feel the warmth spread. It's not spicy, not sweet, just rich, meaty, and oddly comforting. You chew slowly, letting it sit on your tongue like an edible fire starter. Historically, native diets in wet regions weren't just about nutrition. They were about staying dry on the inside. That might sound weird, but think about it. If the weather is constantly soaking your skin and sapping your energy, you need food that fights back. That means oily fish like salmon, eulachon, or seal. It means fat rendered from bear, beaver, or moose. It means warming plants like wild onions, starchy roots, and even pine bark tea to soothe cold-stressed guts. Up north, you'd find seal oil served like soup, sometimes straight from the ladle. Down south, in swampy heat, you'd see fried cornmeal cakes cooked in animal fat, often wrapped in leaves and kept ready for quick energy between canoe trips. Everything was dense. Everything was practical. Nothing was going to leave you shivering and unsatisfied. And here's your wonderfully strange fringe fact. In some Arctic and subarctic tribes, fermented meat and fat were considered delicacies, left underground to age, bubble, and grow sour until they reached peak power food status. Some explorers described the smell as aggressive, but locals prized it for its high energy and storage potential. A couple bites could keep you warm for hours, assuming you could hold it down. The rain keeps hammering, and now someone's heating up a mix of rendered bear fat and berries in a shallow clay dish. It's stirred with a stick, then passed around like hot cocoa. You sip carefully, the texture slick, the taste earthy sweet. The elder beside you explains that this mixture was often eaten at the start of journeys or after a cold hunt, a calorie bomb to remind your muscles that they still mattered. There's still debate among researchers about how much fat was consumed daily versus ritually. Some believe high-fat meals were seasonal, part of winter prep or specific to healing. Others argue that in these rain-heavy regions, high-calorie eating was constant, even in warmer months, because staying dry was as much about keeping your core heated as it was about outerwear. The truth likely bends depending on latitude, food access, and tribe-specific traditions. You shift on your mat, belly now warm and slightly heavy, as if you've swallowed a wood stove. Outside, the wind changes direction and whistles through the trees, but it doesn't feel threatening anymore. You've got internal insulation now. Breakfast the next morning is, no surprise, more of the same. Pemmican, smoked fish, roasted root vegetables rubbed with fat and wrapped in bark. You watch a woman press dried salmon skin into a flat cake, layering it with mashed cattail root and herbs. It's chewy, salty, and unexpectedly tasty. You wonder why no one's selling this at overpriced food trucks. Then you remember, this food isn't meant to be trendy. It's meant to keep you alive. You help stir a pot of soup bubbling over a fire, the broth cloudy with bone marrow and fat. Bits of wild greens float on the surface. You're told this would be eaten during storms, when nothing could be hunted but everything still needed to be nourished. In the old stories, food wasn't just sustenance, it was a companion, a shield, a promise that the fire inside you could outlast the storm outside. By midday, the rain slows to a drizzle, and you feel surprisingly strong, like your body has finally caught up to the climate. You're walking through wet ferns, belly full of oil and heat, feet dry, spirit calm. You start to think less about comfort and more about continuity. The people who lived this way weren't just surviving, they were building systems, teaching kids how to render fat, passing down the right way to dry salmon so it wouldn't rot midwinter, saving the oily bits others would throw away because that's the part that keeps your bones from freezing. You sit down on a damp log and unwrap a pouch made from bark and twine. Inside, another pemmican cake, still solid, still ready. You take a bite, and it's like a message from someone who figured this out centuries ago. Don't worry, it says, we've done this before. And just like that, the rain feels less like an enemy, and more like a known character in the background. Annoying, sure, but manageable, when you've got grease in your gut and a pouch full of calorie bombs in your pocket. By now, you've accepted that the rain is not going anywhere. It's less of an event and more of a personality trait, like a grumpy roommate who keeps tapping on the windows and sighing against the roof. You've stopped flinching at the wet, stopped hoping for blue skies, and today, something clicks. You realise that native survival in this endless damp wasn't just about gear or diets. It was also about partnerships, with animals, creatures that didn't just feed the people, but help them stay dry, warm and alive. You start the morning with a slow walk along a cedar trail, ducking beneath low branches heavy with last night's mist. Beside you trots a dog, not the big goofy kind you're used to, but smaller, woollier and incredibly focused. This isn't your buddy from the dog park. This is a working companion, bred and raised for a specific purpose. Fibre. Yes, we're back to woolly dogs, because these little beasts were the MVPs of the anti-rain lifestyle.
No.
This one's got a thick undercoat that feels more like sheep fleece than fur. Your guide tells you the dog will be shorn in the spring, just like a sheep, and the undercoat will be spun into yarn for robes, blankets, and even ceremonial garments. It's a cycle. Feed the dog, care for the dog, and in return, the dog helps clothe the people. It's not ownership, it's a partnership. You pass a fenced area. Nothing elaborate, just woven branches that keep these special dogs from mixing with hunting or camp dogs. Historically, tribes like the Coast Salish kept their wool dogs on islands or peninsulas, giving them specific diets to ensure their coats grew thick and clean. Seaweed, fish scraps, even roots, anything that added richness to the fibre. You crouch down and give the dog a scratch behind the ears. It leans into you with a kind of quiet pride, like it knows it's important, because it is. But dogs weren't the only animal allies in the rain. Up north you'd find mountain goats, elusive white-coated climbers whose wool was collected from shed patches caught on brush, or even hunted and skinned for high-grade fibre. This wool was softer than dog hair, more like cashmere, and used for elite garments, often woven with symbolic patterns. One robe made from goat wool and cedar bark could take months to create. It wasn't just clothing, it was insulation, armour, and art. Further inland, tribes relied on larger animals not just for meat, but for their skins. Moose hide, bear hide, elk hide, tanned and softened with brains, then treated with oils to become water resistant. These hides were worn in layered outfits, especially for hunters who had to stand for hours in cold drizzle, waiting for a chance to strike. A moose hide coat, properly treated, could turn away water almost as well as modern rain gear, and it didn't tear if you brushed against a tree the wrong way. Here's your peculiar fringe fact. Some hunters carried small pouches of weasel fur, believed to ward off damp spirits or bad weather. Weasels themselves weren't especially dry, but their reputation for slipping through anything made them symbolic protectors against soaking through. Superstition? Maybe. But when your survival depends on staying dry, you'll take all the charm you can get. There's scholarly debate around how domesticated some of these wool dogs really were. Some argue they were treated more like livestock, bred for fibre and kept apart. Others believe they lived closely with families, even sleeping in shelters and sharing food. Oral histories suggest both. One elder once described his grandmother spinning yarn straight from a dog sitting in her lap. No shearing needed, just gentle plucking. That's intimacy. That's trust. You return to camp and watch as someone carefully brushes a dog with a handmade comb, collecting loose fibres into a pouch. The dog looks peaceful, even proud. Nearby, another is stretched out beside the fire, drying after a rainy foray into the forest. Dogs were often tasked with more than just providing wool. They pulled sleds in colder regions, helped find game trails, alerted sleepers to floods or prowlers, even carried small bundles in waterproof packs lashed to their sides. Your guide tosses you a piece of gear, a simple wrap made from twisted mountain goat hair, water repellent and incredibly warm. It's been used for years, maybe decades, patched and oiled until it's nearly indestructible. You pull it over your shoulders and instantly feel the difference. The fibres breathe, they insulate, they deflect the wind, as if the goat spirit is still helping you weather the storm. Animals in this world weren't just resources, they were weather experts, waterproof by design, adapted to swamps, rivers, rainforests and snowy ridgelines long before people showed up with woven mats and fire sticks. By observing them, working with them, and yes, sometimes becoming them in dance and story, native peoples absorbed a kind of wisdom that can't be taught in classrooms. You sit later with a weaver, watching her spin yarn from a dog fur blend, her hands moving like she's pulling thread straight from the air. She tells you about a time when they lost one of the wool dogs during a storm and how the entire family searched for 2 days, not because of the fibre, but because he was part of their shelter, part of their winter plan. He was found, wet but safe, curled beneath a tree on high ground, smart like all of them. Outside, the rain has started up again, a light pattering on the roof. The dogs barely twitch. You lie down that night under a blanket woven from creatures that once stood in this same weather, eyes wide and ears tuned to the same sounds. Your breath slows, your heartbeat settles. You're dry, because they were, and because someone long ago watched how the animals stayed dry and decided to listen. You wake to the rhythmic scratch snap of something being pulled tight and fastened. It's still early, mist pooling low in the trees, but the longhouse is already alive with hands at work. You rise, stretch under your dog hair blanket and follow the sound to the far side of the structure, where half a dozen people are seated in a circle, weaving. But not just any weaving, this is serious business. Tensioned fibres crisscross on large wooden looms, the patterns forming like whispers between hands. These aren't blankets or baskets, these are weatherproof textiles, handcrafted layers of protection, as good as anything synthetic, and way more stylish. Today, You're about to step into the world of weaving wars, not battles of violence but of prestige. A silent contest of mastery played out over centuries, where every tribe had their own patterns, their own techniques, their own signature rain-beating flex. And here in the land of endless drizzle, that meant weaving for function just as much as form. You sit beside a weaver, her fingers moving so fast they blur. She's working with a blend of softened cedar bark and dog wool, the fibres twisted into threads so strong you can barely pull them apart. She dips the yarn into a basin of fish oil before working it through the frame, making the cloth not just water-resistant but practically waterproof. You run your fingers along a finished section, and the weave is so tight, so precise, it squeaks under pressure. Water doesn't even get a chance. You're told this particular pattern, a series of alternating zigzags and spirals, signifies a coastal family line, passed down like a surname. Weaving wasn't just a domestic chore, it was language. A robe could tell a story, a blanket could show your place in the world, and a cape, especially one designed for rain, could declare how prepared you were for anything the clouds dared throw at you. Back in the day, some robes made for leaders or high-ranking families were woven so densely and treated with so much bear grease that they doubled as cloaks, sleeping mats, and, if folded properly, a kind of makeshift boat seat. Multi-purpose before that was even a buzzword. You're handed a smaller loom and some fibre to try weaving yourself. At first, it's a mess. Your lines wobble, your tension slips, your knot looks like something a stressed raccoon might do if given a ball of yarn. But the weaver beside you just chuckles, then leans in to adjust your hands. Her movements are exact, calm, centuries of knowledge packed into muscle memory. Historically, weaving was often the domain of women, passed from mother to daughter, aunt to niece. But in some tribes, men wove too, especially ceremonial pieces. And when it came to rain gear, the techniques were sacred, carefully guarded, sometimes only practiced within specific lineages. In coastal regions, the prestige of one's raincape could rival that of a decorated war shirt or chief's headdress. Not because it was flashy, but because it worked, because it endured. Here's your wonderfully niche fringe fact. Some ceremonial rain garments included metallic threads, thin strips of abalone shell or flattened copper wire, worked into the weave not just for beauty but to shimmer in the dim forest light. The shimmer, some believed, distracted bad spirits during storms or honoured the reflective power of rain itself. Imagine stepping out into the fog, your cloak catching stray beams of dawn and scattering them like broken stars. There's debate among researchers about whether certain robes, like the famous Chilkat weaving or raven's tail robes, were actually used for weather protection or just ceremonial display. Some scholars insist they were too precious, too heavy. Others argue that certain pieces began as rain gear before evolving into regalia. It's a blurry line, as most useful things eventually become sacred in cultures where every day is a survival story. You're invited to watch the oiling of a finished piece. The weaver unfolds a full-length robe woven from cedar bark and dog hair, then uses a heated stone to rub a mixture of salmon oil and bear grease into the fibres. The fabric darkens slightly, taking on a soft sheen. When tested, drops of water bead and run off like marbles on wax. The robe is heavy, yes, but balanced. When worn, the weight pulls the shoulders back, straightens the spine. You feel taller just looking at it. Then you try one on. It's warm, structured, empowering. The weave pulls close around your arms but leaves room to move. The oils seal in warmth while keeping out the mist. You can tell this was built not just to survive the rain, but to wear it with dignity. As the day unfolds, you notice people around camp wearing weavings in all shapes. Capes, head wraps, skirts, ankle wraps, each designed with intention. Some are newly made, others have clearly been repaired countless times. Patches stitched with slightly mismatched threads, each fix a small story of survival. No one throws out a good weave. It lives on, gets passed down, gathers meaning. You help hang finished capes near the fire to dry, watching the way the fabric stiffens slightly with heat, then relaxes again in the steam. Even the smoke plays its part, curing the oils, keeping the mildew at bay, adding that unmistakable scent of survival that sticks to your clothes and your memories long after you leave. That night, around the fire, someone points to your latest weaving attempt and nods in approval. It's crooked, uneven, it smells like fish fat. But it held up in the rain earlier, and that counts for something. The wind howls outside. A fresh wave of rain slaps the bark walls of the longhouse. But inside you're wrapped in hand-woven history, tight, oiled, warm, and as you pull the cedar fibre blanket over your legs and lean back, you realise this. Sometimes, beating the weather isn't about hiding from it. It's about turning it into something you wear with pride. The rain tonight doesn't fall, it whispers. Thin streaks drift sideways through the trees, barely tapping the bark, sliding off leaves like they were made to carry water rather than stop it. You lie on your mat, half asleep, staring up through the smoke hole of the longhouse, watching grey clouds shift above like ancient sails. It's in this softened silence that the stories begin. Not the ones about how to stay dry, but why the rain comes at all. And suddenly you're not just learning survival tactics, you're stepping into the deeper layer, the myths and meanings behind the weather that never ends. An elder sits beside the fire, her voice low and steady, telling a tale you've never heard but somehow recognise. In it, the rain is a spirit. Not cruel, but persistent. A teacher, maybe a trickster. It follows people who ignore the land, who forget their songs, who take more than they need. But it also follows those it loves, showering them with presents, drenching them in dreams. The story has no ending, just a loop, like the rain itself. You've stepped into the world of rain myths, the spiritual layer of life in a land where the sky is never really done weeping. These aren't bedtime stories meant to scare kids into obedience. These are explanations passed down through breath and firelight that help people make sense of a world where the ground is always soft and the sun is a fleeting visitor. In one tribe's story, rain comes from a great bird whose wings sweep the ocean sky, shaking loose clouds as it searches for its stolen eggs. In another, a weeping giant roams the mountaintops, mourning his lost brother, flooding valleys with his tears, and in yet another, the rain is a messenger, a bridge between worlds, carrying voices to the ancestors who live in the fog beyond the treetops. You're told not to complain about the rain, not out loud. It hears, it listens, and it remembers. Complain too much and it might stay longer, or vanish completely. Neither is good. Balance is everything. These stories aren't just poetic, they're warnings, teachings, rituals woven into the rhythms of daily life. And you start to see how meaning becomes a survival tool, not just emotionally, but physically. The rain keeps people inside longer. That means more time with family, more time for oral tradition, more time to pass on the how along with the why, when to move camp, where to find dry bark, what moss to eat when nothing else grows. Knowledge rides on story like water rides on cedar. It soaks in slowly over time. Here's your fringe fact for the night. Some communities believe dreams during storms carried special meaning, that the sound of rain on the roof amplified spiritual messages. In some regions, people would even sleep outside during gentle rainfalls, under partial shelters, to hear better. Rain wasn't a nuisance, it was an antenna. You sit by the fire and sip hot tea made from Labrador leaves and mint, its warmth seeping down your throat like a promise. Around you, more stories are shared. Not just about rain, but about floods, giant, ancient ones, the kind that reset the world. One story tells of a canoe that floated above the trees while the earth drowned, the people inside singing songs to keep the rain from taking their names. Another speaks of animals who climbed into the clouds to patch the leak in the sky. Another of a child who became the first raindrop after disobeying the thunder. You wonder if these stories connect. Across continents, across oceans. Every culture has its rain myths, its deluge warnings, its tales of spirits that weep, or sky wolves that chase the moon into storms. But here, in the land of endless drizzle, the stories hit different. They don't feel distant or metaphorical. They feel local, immediate, wet. There's debate among scholars about how much mythology influenced day-to-day decisions. Did people really wait for the spirit bird to appear before planting roots or building shelter? Some anthropologists argue that these stories were purely symbolic. Others believe they were operational knowledge, wrapped in metaphor to be remembered. If a tale says, "Don't camp where the water spirit rests," maybe it just means avoid the floodplain. You don't need a weather app when you've got a myth that's lasted 500 generations. You help feed the fire, watching sparks vanish into the smoky roof gap, and someone leans over to tell you a story from their grandfather. It's about a man who challenged the rain, built a house so sealed, so oiled, so smoke-dried, that not a drop could get in. He bragged, mocked the clouds, dared the storm. And one night, The rain came not from the sky, but from beneath. The floorboards softened, the fire sputtered. Water crept up from the roots. He woke drowning. The point? Don't be smug. Even Cedar has its limits. It's a warning wrapped in humour and everyone laughs. Not because it's funny necessarily, but because it's true. You don't win against the rain. You make peace with it. You give it a story so it stays familiar, predictable, bearable. Later, curled under your wool blanket, you listen as more stories pass between the sleepers. Some are whispered, some are sung. The rain patters on the roof, softer now, a lullaby from above. Maybe from that great sky bird, maybe just from clouds too tired to keep fighting gravity. You close your eyes and let the myths wash over you, as steady and grounding as the rain itself. You don't need every word to understand. The story holds you, warms you, reminds you that even in the wettest, darkest months there is rhythm, there is memory, and there is magic in the sky's sadness. You wake early, but the world is already awake before you. The forest hums with life, not loudly, but in that dense, quiet kind of way, where every movement is soaked in dew and purpose. Somewhere in the trees a raven calls, dry, cackling, like it knows more than you do and isn't planning to explain any of it. You stretch, pull on your now well-loved moccasins, and step outside into mist so thick it feels like walking through someone else's breath. It's time to learn how to move through this soaked world quietly, without splashing, stumbling, or leaving a trail behind you. Today it's all about footprints in the fog, how native people mastered stealth and travel in conditions that turned most terrain into a muddy mess of giveaways. Here, every step matters. Every imprint in the earth can say something you might rather keep private. Your direction, your weight, whether you were alone, how fast you were moving. But for those who lived in the rain, the trail didn't just get wet, it got complicated, and they adapted in ways you're about to clumsily try to imitate. Your guide doesn't say much, just gestures toward the forest, then takes off barefoot across a muddy trail without a sound. You try to follow. Instantly you step in something squishy and loud. Probably moss, possibly shame. The difference isn't important. Your guide turns, grins, then points down at your feet. You're shown the difference between walking on the trail versus through it. On rainy days, obvious paths are avoided. Too exposed, too slick, and too likely to keep your footprints. Instead, you cut through the brush, stepping on stones, roots, and the thickest mats of lichen. The trick isn't speed, it's rhythm. You move slow, placing your feet on surfaces that don't compress much, things that spring back, that don't leave dents behind. You learn to scan ahead for the spots that won't betray you. Historically, this wasn't just a hunting tactic, it was everyday movement. Avoiding signs of presence wasn't always about hiding from people. It was also about respecting the land, the animals, and the spirits that watched from the branches. You didn't stomp through the forest and declare yourself. You moved like you belonged, like your steps were part of the rain's quiet drumbeat. You pause at a creek where a narrow log crosses the water. Your guide walks across it like it's a hallway. You hesitate, arms out, shoes soaked, just thinking about falling. The log is slick with rain and moss, but you remember a tip. Crouch slightly, keep your weight low, move slowly, don't stare down, look where you want to go. You take the first step and manage to stay dry, mostly. Once across, your guide kneels beside the trail and shows you how to mask a footprint. Rake a branch lightly across the mark, then scatter leaves over the top. In some places, people would bend back plants rather than break them, moving through brush in a way that allowed the greenery to spring back into place, erasing the passage. You try it. Your tracks still scream newcomer, but you're learning. Here's a weird little fringe trick you weren't expecting. In deep rain or fog, some hunters carried bundles of moss or animal hide tied to their feet, like wet weather slippers. These muffled footfalls and distributed weight, leaving less of a mark on soft ground. Think of it like ancient stealth mode, but fuzzier. You try on a version made from cedar fibre and deer hide and instantly notice the change. Your steps are quieter, lighter, less invasive. You also learn to read the fog, not just as weather, but as camouflage. Moving just as it thickens lets you vanish. Waiting until the air is still before crossing open space reduces the sound of rustling gear or crunching bark. You're told fog isn't just something you put up with. It's a gift, a veil, a shield for those who know how to time their steps between gusts. There's ongoing debate among scholars about how much stealth techniques were used in daily life versus reserved for war or hunting. Some say this level of quiet movement was constant, a reflection of deep respect for the land. Others suggest it was used sparingly, more for strategy than routine. But the elders here speak of it like breathing, not something you perform, but something you are. You continue moving through the forest, your eyes now trained on terrain instead of horizon. A patch of drier ground under a spruce, a flat stone embedded in the trail, a thick tuft of moss wide enough to step on. You're starting to feel the land under your feet differently, not just as something to walk on, but as something reacting to your every move, responding, listening. By midday, the rain returns, not heavily, but enough to smear the earth in a fresh coat of slickness. Your guide leads you to a small lookout, a natural rise between two cedar groves. From here, you see the trails you've crossed barely marked. You see the others too, deer paths, narrower than you'd expect, vanishing into thick brush. You realise then that the forest remembers more than you thought. Back at camp, you practice stepping across damp ground without splashing. It's an art. Heel to toe, slow and deliberate. You watch a child do it better than you after about 4 seconds. He grins and walks away like a ninja with pigtails. That evening, a story is shared around the fire of a man who moved so softly through the rain-soaked forest that even the birds mistook him for mist. The animals showed him their hiding places. The rain parted for his feet. He never left tracks. Some say he still walks, unseen, through foggy mountain passes, carrying messages from village to village. The moral? Walk gently. Travel like you're not the only one trying to stay dry. You fall asleep that night thinking of that man, of the way the moss felt under your feet, of the rhythm of moving without disturbing anything. Rain drums lightly on the roof. Your breath falls in time with it, and the earth beneath you, for once, keeps no record of your passing. The rain today is not polite. It doesn't mist. It doesn't drizzle. It slams. You're woken by the sound of it hammering the longhouse roof like 1,000 angry fingers, demanding entry. Outside, the sky's a sheer wall of grey. The trees are swaying. The wind whistles through the cracks like it's searching for you personally. The fire inside the longhouse flickers low, half drowned in its own smoke. You pull your blanket tighter and wonder, just for a second, how do you keep fire alive in this? Then someone mutters beside you, in a voice half groggy, half ritual, feed it before the wind finds it, and that's your cue. Today, it's all about fire that won't die, the ancient high-stakes art of keeping warmth and light alive when the entire universe seems bent on putting it out. Forget lighters, forget dry matches, forget stashing a Zippo in your raincoat. You're going to learn how native people kept flame through weeks, months, sometimes whole seasons of relentless wet. And it starts with never letting it die in the first place. You help rekindle the central hearth with smouldering coals carefully preserved overnight. They're tucked into a bundle of dry moss wrapped in bark, still warm and pulsing faintly. This is the sacred ember, the core of the fire saved and carried from place to place like a newborn. You unwrap it gently while someone prepares the kindling. Shaved cedar bark, a few curls of pitchwood, and tiny slivers of dry twig gathered from the undersides of trees. No piece of fuel is more than finger thick at first. You learn that fire, like people, hates being overwhelmed too soon. You lean close, breathe steadily, and watch the first wisp of smoke curl upward. It's a delicate moment. Too fast and it chokes. Too slow and it dies. You fan it with your hand, then blow through your cupped fingers until the ember catches. The bark ignites with a soft hiss, and suddenly, warmth starts to fight back against the cold. Here's the real kicker. Everything you're using has been prepared days ahead. In rain country, you don't find dry wood lying around waiting to be used. You create dry wood. Logs are split. The inner cores stored under shelter. Twigs are gathered on sunny days, or, let's be honest, less wet days, and kept in bundles hung near the ceiling, where smoke slowly seasons them. Resin is collected from pitch trees and stored in hollowed bones or shells. In this place, fire isn't spontaneous, it's strategic. And here's your strange but true fringe fact. Some tribes used antler or horn containers to carry fire on the move. Coals nestled inside, wrapped in moss or fungi like tinder bundles. These ancient thermoses could smoulder for hours, even days as long as you kept them fed. Some stories claim a fire was kept alive continuously for generations, never relit from scratch, only passed forward, like a family heirloom that glowed. You step outside with a handful of bark shavings to fetch more kindling from the wood shelter. A sloped lean-to covered in tightly lashed bark, elevated off the ground to avoid runoff. Inside are rows of split logs arranged like books on a shelf. The driest ones are always toward the centre. You're taught to rotate them regularly. Let the smoke from the fire cure them over time. Even soggy wood can be salvaged, scraped, shaved or peeled to find the dry core. If you ever thought you could just toss a log into the fire and be done with it, think again. There's a scholarly debate about how often fire was lost and remade in these conditions. Some suggest that every camp had a firekeeper, a person whose sole job was to protect and preserve the flame. Others argue that with enough knowledge, relighting fire wasn't terribly hard, even in the rain. But the truth is probably both. Fire was too essential to risk. If it went out, you could make it again, but you'd rather not. You learn a few of the backup methods anyway. One involves a hand drill, spinning a dry stick into a notched base of soft wood until the friction creates heat and powder that bursts into ember. It sounds easy. It is not. Your hands are sore after 10 minutes and you've made smoke but no flame. The elder beside you nods like, "Nice try, city hands," and then casually spins a coal in 30 seconds flat. You make a note to befriend whoever has the fire bundle if things go south. You're shown how to build a fire that resists rain. Wide base of bark, then small kindling teepee style, then larger split logs lean together to create a heat chimney. Once the core catches, the outer logs slowly dry and feed the flame from the outside in. Smoke spirals upward in a clean column, sucked by the vent hole above. A crossbeam nearby holds wet clothing, tools and today's catch of smoked salmon, all drying in the fire's reach. Nothing goes to waste. Not warmth, not smoke, not time. You sit beside the flame now, watching it burn with the stubbornness of a story told too often to forget. It's not flashy, it's not tall, but it's alive. And in this place, that's all that matters. As the storm roars outside, someone tosses in a stick and tells a story about the time rain fell for 40 days straight, and the only flame left was a single coal carried in the pocket of a hunter's tunic wrapped in fox fur. The hunter didn't speak for the entire journey, afraid that even his breath would blow it out. But he made it. He brought it home, and that coal started the next winter's fires. You wonder how many other flames out there are secretly carrying the memory of storms past, quietly burning, waiting to be needed again. You pull your blanket tighter, warm now, safe. The rain may be louder than ever, pounding on the bark above, sliding in thin rivulets down the posts. But the fire, it's steady, it's sharp, it's winning, and as you drift towards sleep you think, not all warmth is heat. Some of it is history, some of it is effort, and some of it is the quiet relief of knowing you don't have to start from scratch if someone before you kept the ember alive and it's morning again, though you wouldn't know it from the light. The sky is that familiar shade of dishwater grey, the kind that doesn't care what time it is. Rain taps gently on the longhouse roof now, like it's remembering how to be polite after yesterday's tantrum. You stretch, groggy but warm, and step out into the cool mist. The world smells like wet cedar, fresh earth, and something else. Smoke? No. Ash. But not the kind from cooking fires. This scent is older, deeper, sacred. You follow it. Today you're walking into a world where getting wet isn't a failure of preparation. It's part of the ceremony, where mud isn't mess, it's meaning. You're about to witness a drenched dance, a celebration of spirit, and maybe even a bit of joyful suffering as you explore the strange, beautiful world of sacred mud and wet ceremonies. Your guide meets you barefoot, body streaked with ochre, hair slick with water, eyes clear and calm. He's already been up for hours, preparing the ceremonial site, a flat, open space near a stream, flanked by ferns and thick moss. It doesn't look like much, but you soon learn that everything in this clearing has purpose. Every rock is positioned, every bundle of cedar tied just so. And yes, the mud is intentional, sacred even. Today is a cleansing ceremony, a kind of spiritual rinse that predates all modern concepts of detox by several thousand years. You're told it's about renewal, but also humility. Rain, here, is not the enemy. It's the purifier. You can't approach the spirits dry and proud. You have to be open, drenched, softened by the storm. People arrive slowly, wrapped in bark capes, cedar crowns on their heads, singing soft songs that rise and fall with the wind. The fire nearby sputters but holds. Smoke curls through the rain, clinging to wet skin and robes like a second blessing. Then the dancing begins. Feet stomp in the mud, not lightly but with full commitment. There's no tiptoeing around the mess. The dancers slap the earth with open palms, scoop mud into their hands, and smear it across their chests, their faces, their backs. It looks wild, maybe even chaotic. But every movement follows a rhythm. Every splash is part of a greater beat you can almost feel in your own chest. You learn that this mud, this wet earth, comes from a specific spot upstream, dug during the first moon of the rainy season. It's mixed with cedar ash and a powder made from crushed shells, believed to hold ancestral energy. The mud isn't decoration, it's communication. A message painted in the oldest language. Body, earth, water, breath. Here's your curious fringe fact. In some regions, mud was used not just in ceremonies, but in healing, packed around injuries like clay, believed to draw out infection and illness. The same sacred mud used in rituals might be saved and dried, then rehydrated for medicinal purposes later. So yeah, you could say these people had a holistic skincare routine centuries before anyone was selling mud masks at $80 a jar. As the ceremony builds, the singing grows louder. The rain, oddly enough, softens. The air takes on that charged, crackling stillness that always comes before something shifts. You feel it too. Not in a dramatic, movie-ending kind of way, just a subtle awareness that the line between the physical and spiritual is thinned a bit. And suddenly you get it. You get why someone would choose to stomp barefoot through cold, wet earth, instead of sitting by the fire. You get why they'd smear mud on their skin and let the rain run down their spine like a second heartbeat. Because sometimes staying dry isn't the goal. Sometimes you need the storm. There's debate, of course. Anthropologists still argue about how much these wet rituals were spiritual versus practical. Were they purely symbolic? Were they medicine disguised as myth? Or were they simply cultural expressions that blurred every line between body, weather, and belief? The truth, as always, is probably yes. All of it. At once. You're invited to join. A bowl of mud is passed to you, its surface rippling in your trembling hands. You hesitate, then dip your fingers in. It's cold, silky, smells like mineral-rich earth and faint cedar smoke. You press it to your forehead, then your heart. No one tells you what it means. You don't need them to. When you step into the dance, the earth sucks gently at your feet. Each stomp is met with resistance, but you move anyway. Your cape soaks heavier with rain. The mud climbs your legs. But instead of feeling weighed down, you feel anchored, present, like every raindrop has a purpose, and so do you. After the final song, the group returns slowly to the fire. The mud is left behind, on bodies, on the ground, on the cedar branches that mark the ceremonial ring. No one speaks for a while. The quiet is respectful, full. You sit, steam rising from your soaked clothes, watching smoke and rain mingle in the air like old friends catching up. Your skin feels oddly warm, despite the cold. There's a hum in your bones, and your heart beats a little slower, a little steadier. The elder beside you finally breaks the silence. "Now you're clean," he says, grinning, mud still streaked across his cheeks. You laugh, because yeah, you are. That night, back inside the longhouse, your feet are still caked in drying mud. You could clean them, but you don't. Not yet. Because maybe, just maybe, part of staying dry in a wet world is knowing when to let the water in. The next morning, the world smells different. Not just wet, but cleansed. There's a clarity to the air that wasn't there yesterday, like the storm pulled the sky inside out and gave it a good rinse. Even the trees seem more awake. Cedar leaves brighter, moss puffier, birds bolder. But more than anything, something inside you feels clearer. After being caked in sacred mud, after stomping through puddles with purpose, after getting soaked and somehow still warmed by it, you're beginning to see the bigger picture. You haven't just been learning how to stay dry, you've been learning how to stay steady. Dry in the mind, even when the body's drenched. Today, you learn how native peoples built something more powerful than a cedar roof or bark cape. They built mental weatherproofing. It starts with silence, a long, purposeful kind, not awkward, not empty, just quiet. The kind that thickens around a fire in the early hours, when the embers are still waking and the people are wrapped in their own thoughts. You sit there too, resisting the urge to fill the space with words. No one's asking you to explain yourself. No one's checking the weather. You listen to the breath of the forest, the slow drip of water from the rafters, the distant crackle of something falling in the woods, probably a branch too waterlogged to hold on. And that's where it begins, with observation, stillness, the awareness that you can't control the rain, or stop the cold, or outshout a thunderstorm, but you can decide how you meet it. This isn't modern mindfulness. This is old. Older than even the language that tries to describe it. An elder notices your stillness and nods. He walks over slowly and sits beside you without saying a word. Then finally he points to a spot just outside the longhouse, where a cluster of ferns trembles beneath a steady drip from the eaves. You can't stop the drip, he says, but you can move the fern. That's the whole lesson, and it lands harder than you expect. Later that morning you're invited to join a group walking a trail in total silence. Not for stealth this time, but for clarity. It's a daily ritual, not a chore. You carry nothing but a cedar branch in your hand, letting it brush the path ahead of you, a small offering for safe passage. The forest is alive with movement, wet wings, animal tracks, the occasional distant howl. But inside, you're still. It's not about zoning out, it's about tuning in. The rain on your face doesn't feel hostile anymore, it feels honest. Mental rainproofing is just that, a way of staying centred in a landscape that wants to wash you away. And indigenous people in the rainiest parts of the continent didn't just build physical shelters, they built emotional ones too. Songs, stories, humour, ceremony. These weren't just culture, they were insulation. You return to camp and listen as someone tells a joke, dry and sharp even though everyone's soaked. People laugh, loudly and without apology. That's another form of weatherproofing. Laughter that cuts through fog like flint on steel. You realise that in a place where the sun disappears for weeks, humour isn't a luxury, it's a survival tool. You help gather firewood, wet, heavy, stubborn, and no one complains. Not because it's fun, but because it's normal. Complaining, you notice, is rare here. Not absent, just different. It doesn't sound like despair, it sounds like storytelling. Remember the winter the rain froze in the trees and turned them into spears, one man says, tossing a log onto the pile. We slept in the smoke for 2 weeks. We smelled like bacon. My wife didn't speak to me for a month. Everyone laughs. Even the smoke seems to chuckle. Here's your fascinating fringe fact. Some tribes developed rain songs, not to summon or stop the rain, but to mark time within it. These weren't chants to the sky. They were meant for people, a way to acknowledge the storm's presence without letting it take over the spirit. Some of these songs were slow and droning, meant to mimic the rhythm of falling rain. Others were light, almost teasing, meant to poke fun at the weather's persistence. There's debate among researchers whether this kind of mental discipline was taught directly or absorbed through culture. Did someone sit you down and say, "Hey, here's how to not lose your mind in the rain"? Or did you just watch your elders keep going day after wet day and learn by osmosis? Probably both. Because when your environment demands resilience, you don't wait to develop it. You inherit it, live it, shape it into habit. By midday, the clouds open up again. Just a drizzle, but persistent. You don't even flinch. You're helping patch a bark mat, tying strips with sinew, and your hands are slick but steady. Rain lands on your arms, your shoulders, your head. You're soaked by the end of it. But the fire inside, dry, untouched. Later, during a meal of smoked roots and fish fat, you're told about the time a young man once tried to beat the rain by hiding in a cave for a whole month. Wouldn't leave, just stayed inside trying to stay dry. When he finally came out, the rain had stopped, but he was cold, hungry, and ghost pale. The lesson: you can't hide from the rain forever. Better to walk through it with your head up. You sit with that story, feel it settle like warm coals in your chest. That evening, back in the longhouse, you help hang cloaks and blankets to dry. The air is thick with steam, laughter, and the smell of burning cedar. You can hear the rain outside, but it doesn't bother you. Not anymore. It's just part of the soundscape, like your own breath. You curl up in your woven mat, heavy with sleep, your brain surprisingly light. And in that moment, wrapped in wood smoke, damp wool, and the slow drip of rain, you realise you're not fighting the storm. You're flowing with it, which might just be the most waterproof thing of all. By now you've stopped looking for sunshine like it owes you something. The rain is part of your routine, your scent, your vocabulary. It slaps the roof, beads on your cloak, and drips off your nose like punctuation. And just when you think you've settled into your own soggy rhythm, something changes. A visitor arrives, not a tourist, not like you were, but someone from another village. They step into camp in full rain gear, cedar bark cape, waterproof moccasins, a bark-woven pack that glistens with a fresh coat of bear grease. There's a pause, a kind of ceremonial hush. Then someone greets them, not with suspicion or fear, but with a nod and a shared cup of warm broth. It feels simple, is anything but. Today, you're learning how the rain shaped diplomacy. Because when you live in a world where the weather is unpredictable, harsh and downright personal, building trust and resolving tension becomes an art. And often, that art takes place under the same leaking roof. You're invited to watch as elders from your host camp and the visiting group settle into a gathering circle. No speeches, no handshakes, just fire, food, and mutual respect. The rain ticks steadily on the bark shelter above, and someone pours tea made from spruce tips and yarrow. Conversation begins, not about politics, but about weather. Rain as a safe opener, a common enemy, or maybe a shared ancestor. You're told that in many indigenous cultures, especially in the Pacific Northwest and parts of the subarctic, rainy seasons were the time for diplomacy. The cold made war impractical. Wet weather discouraged long travel. People stayed close to home or travelled specifically to talk, to trade, to marry, or to settle disputes that couldn't be left to rot over winter. Rain wasn't a barrier to negotiation. It was the perfect backdrop. You learn that hosting another tribe during a storm was a statement. We will keep you dry, fed, and warm. It wasn't just polite, it was political. Your ability to offer shelter in the worst of weather said everything about your power, your organisation, your honour. If you couldn't keep your own longhouse dry, who would trust your promises? You notice that both groups seated around the fire have taken off their cloaks and laid them out carefully. Symbols of transparency. Nothing hidden. Everything aired, even as the storm rages on. Here's your unexpected fringe fact. In some tribes, negotiations included symbolic exchanges of rain gear. A guest might offer a woven hat or bark cape to the host as a gesture of trust, and the host might return the favour. These weren't casual gifts. They were soaked in meaning. Take this. It will keep you dry when I'm not there to shelter you. That kind of care speaks volumes in a world built on rain. There's debate among historians about how much formal diplomacy existed in pre-colonial native societies. Some argue that alliances were mostly based on family and trade, not politics in the European sense. Others point out complex council systems, multi-tribe peace gatherings, and ritual protocols that clearly served diplomatic functions. But regardless of what term you slap on it, the rainy season was a pressure cooker for peace. Because if tensions boiled over when everyone was stuck inside, things got messy fast. You watch as a small exchange takes place. A bundle of smoked fish is passed from guest to host, and in return, a woven mat. It's not an even trade, economically speaking. But that's not the point. These are gestures, anchors, reminders that even in the wettest months relationships can be maintained. You're told a story, half remembered, half performance, about two clans that once fought over a river mouth. Fish, trade, pride, the usual. But one year, the rains came early, and neither side could travel. They ended up trapped in the same winter camp by accident. For 10 days they shared one longhouse. At first, no talking, just rain, fish broth, and eye contact. Then someone made a joke, then a song, then they played a game. By the time the sun showed up a month later, they'd married off 2 daughters and combined their fishing territories. Maybe it happened like that. Maybe it didn't. But the story endures because it makes sense. Because shared misery builds strange alliances, and nothing bonds people like keeping each other warm and dry when the wind is howling and the roof's starting to leak. You're handed a bowl of food and offered a spot closer to the fire. The guest across from you smiles, nods, and hands you a bit of their own dried root stash. An unspoken agreement that for now, you're in this together. You begin to notice the non-verbal patterns, the way people lean in when they agree, the slight tilt of a head when someone's overstepped, the laugh that smooths tension, the silence that's used like punctuation. You realise rain has made everyone better listeners, and maybe that's the secret. When it's too loud to argue, too wet to storm off, and too cold to fume outside, you sit. You speak carefully, you listen harder, you share what you have, you pass the warmth back and forth until trust, like the fire, catches. By the end of the gathering, the storm is still going strong, but you don't feel chilled anymore. Agreements have been made, not on paper, but in action, in food shared, in cloaks dried side by side near the fire. You curl up later in your spot by the wall, the longhouse full of soft murmurs and the occasional snore. Rain is still drumming overhead. But inside there's warmth and peace, and the quiet knowledge that sometimes the best kind of diplomacy is simply this. Come in, we'll keep you dry too. It's the middle of the night and the rain hasn't stopped, it's just changed. Now it's softer, more deliberate, like a lullaby for the trees. The longhouse is dark, save for the dying glow of a central fire, its last few coals pulsing like sleepy eyes. You lie there, wrapped in your cedar fibre blanket, listening. Not just hearing, but listening. Because tonight, it isn't about staying dry, or staying warm, or even staying awake. Tonight you're learning to hear the sound of the soak, and how native people turned rain into music, memory and meaning. At first it's simple, the obvious sounds. Water dripping from the beams, tapping on the bark roof, pooling gently in the clay catch basins beneath the vent holes. But as your ears tune in, the soundscape grows. A rhythm forms, rain tapping off pine needles, dripping from the edge of a woven mat, splattering onto bare earth. Somewhere outside, a steady stream gurgles as it meets a fallen log, and a hollow echo follows, water against wood. And then, there it is, a voice. Not speech, not song, just a tone. Someone outside near the edge of the forest begins a slow, low beat on a hide drum. The rhythm doesn't fight the rain, it follows it, accentuates it. Then a second sound joins in, high and warbling. A wooden flute, its notes sliding in and out like mist through trees. It doesn't pierce the air, it drifts, and it makes sense. Because in a world where storms dominate the seasons, you don't compete with the rain. You harmonise. You step outside into the soft storm. The air is thick but not cold, and everything glows silver beneath a cloud-filtered moon. Around the fire, a small circle has formed. No performance, just practice. People taking turns listening, then responding. The flute mimics the rhythm of a slow drizzle. The drum marks the pauses, the space between bursts, and then a voice rises. Not a chant, not a melody in the Western sense, but a vocal rhythm made of breath and vowel sounds. An imitation of water, of fog, of wind moving through wet leaves. Music here isn't separate from nature. It is nature, and rain, far from being background noise, is instrumental. You're told that rain rhythms were often used in traditional songs, not as metaphors, but as literal beat structures. The intervals between drops could set the timing for a song. A sudden thunderclap might end it. In some tribes, drumming under a storm wasn't just for ceremony. It was a way to speak through the weather, to signal distant neighbours or pass messages only the initiated would recognise. Here's your fringe fact. Some indigenous musicians used water drums, which are just what they sound like. Drums with water inside the body cavity that change tone based on movement. During storms, the fluctuating rhythm of the rain would blend with the shifting pitch of the drum, creating a layered soundscape that couldn't be reproduced in dry conditions. You haven't lived until you've heard one, though tonight's rhythm is probably the next best thing. There's an academic debate, of course there is, about how much of this was music versus sound ritual. Some scholars label it ambient tradition, others insist it's proto-music. But the people here don't seem too concerned with the categorization. To them, the rain is a collaborator, a percussionist that never asks permission but always shows up. Someone hands you a small shaker made from a hollowed gourd filled with tiny stones. You start slow, keeping your beat behind the rhythm of the rain, not ahead of it. That's the trick. You're not leading, you're joining. You tap the gourd gently against your palm and the sound is barely audible, but it blends, and for once, you're not making noise to be heard. You're making sound to disappear into something larger. Later, you listen to a story told by one of the elders about a young boy who wanted to stop the rain so he could go hunting. He climbed the highest tree and shouted to the sky, demanding it close, but the sky just laughed and rained harder. The boy sulked under the branches, too proud to return home. Eventually he started mimicking the rhythm of the storm, first with sticks, then with his voice. When he did, the rain slowed. Not because he silenced it, but because he understood it. The moral? When you learn the rain's song, it changes. Or maybe you do. As dawn creeps in, you lie back under the eaves and close your eyes. Rain drips gently from a nearby cedar branch, tapping a low note onto a stone. Someone coughs softly. A sleeping dog shifts in its moss bed. And somewhere in the distance, the final notes of the night's rhythm fade. You fall asleep not in spite of the storm, but because of it. And in your dream, the rain is a flute. And the wind, it's singing along. The smell hits you before your feet even leave the sleeping mat. Damp wood, smouldering ash, and something else. Sour, sweet, a little sharp. You sniff again, cautious. It's the unmistakable scent of mildew. Somewhere in this warm, humid sanctuary something has turned. And no wonder. You've been living in a rain cloud for what feels like weeks now. Outside, the world continues its daily rinse cycle. But inside, you're about to face a different kind of battle. The slow, sneaky war against mould, mildew and rot. Today, you're diving into the unsung heroics of staying not just dry, but dry and clean. Because it turns out, in endless rain, just keeping your cloak from getting soaked isn't enough. You've got to keep your bedding from going musty, your gear from getting fuzzy, and your smoked food from turning into science experiments. And native communities, long before anyone invented bleach or dehumidifiers, had this all figured out. Your host points out the culprit, a corner of the longhouse wall where the bark has started to darken and soften. You reach out to touch it, and the texture has changed, slick and fibrous, like wet paper left too long. Not dangerous yet, but the beginning of trouble. Within moments, people are on it. A cedar brush is brought out. Bark strips are removed. The area is scraped, wiped, dried with hot stones, then sealed with fresh cedar pitch. Quick, methodical, like treating a wound. You're told that longhouses were more than just homes. They were breathing organisms. Every vent mattered. Every dry spot was maintained with care. Fires were placed strategically, not just for heat, but to generate smoke that cured the air. The very design of the roof, the steep pitch, the smoke hole, the overlapping bark shingles, was there to fight rot as much as rain. And the smell of cedar smoke that clings to every surface? That's on purpose. Cedar, you learn, isn't just waterproof, it's antimicrobial. The oil in the wood slows decay, kills mildew spores, and preserves everything from clothing to food to skin. It's the original anti-funk technology. Want your blanket to last through 60 days of fog? Store it near cedar. Want your fish to stay edible long after it's been smoked? Wrap it in cedar bark. You even catch someone rubbing a cedar stick under their arms and realise, yep, forest deodorant. Here's your unexpected fringe fact. In some regions, people used lichen and moss not just for insulation, but for mould control. Certain types of moss were known to absorb excess moisture, and were packed between layers of bedding and clothing storage areas. A primitive but brilliant version of silica gel packets. You peek into a storage nook and find exactly that. Neatly dried moss bundled into corners like little natural sponges, still doing their quiet work. You follow a family as they do their daily dry check. Every mat is unrolled, every basket inspected. Some items are brought outside to air out under a covered awning, where the breeze can reach them without the rain. A boy carefully empties a woven bag and sets the contents. Tools, food bundles and a pair of boots, on a bark mat to be smoked gently over the fire. Another rubs down a dog hair cloak with a mixture of bear fat and crushed herbs. It's not just maintenance, it's ritual, the rhythm of care. There's some debate among scholars about whether mould and mildew are fully understood as we define them now. Probably not, at least not microbiologically. But nobody had to see spores under a microscope to know what happened if you didn't stay ahead of the damp. Everyone had a story of a stash gone sour, a blanket ruined, a winter larder that turned to mush. The lesson passed down wasn't don't get wet, it was don't stay wet. You're shown how certain drying racks are designed to maximise airflow, with split cedar slats positioned to funnel even weak breezes across stored items. Blankets hung at angles, not straight. Tools kept off the ground with bone pegs. Firewood stacked with precision so it smoked from below but didn't bake into ash. It's a choreography of dryness, and every step matters. And when something does get mouldy beyond saving, there's no panic, just repurposing. A spoiled bark mat might become fuel. A rotted garment becomes patching material. Even mildew-damaged cedar can be carved into charms or tokens, kept outside where they serve as warnings or reminders. In a world where rot is inevitable, nothing is wasted. Midday you help scrape some old fish storage boxes, cedar boxes that are so soaked with oil and smoke they seem bulletproof, but even they need care. You scrub the corners with a pine needle brush dipped in vinegar made from fermented berries. It smells weird. It works. The box dries out beautifully, like it's exhaling for the first time in days. Here's the thing. The fight against mildew isn't loud, it's not heroic. There's no epic tale of a warrior saving the village from a mouldy mat, but it's constant, quiet, and absolutely essential. Because rot doesn't come with a trumpet. It comes quietly, softly, the way rain seeps into cracks when no one's looking. That night the longhouse is cleaner than ever. You sit near the fire, watching the smoke curl up to the rafters, carrying away whatever dampness tried to settle in. The mats are dry, the cloaks are dry, even the dogs are dry, curled up in little piles of contented fluff. Outside, the rain pours. Inside, the walls are sealed with pitch, the baskets lined with moss, and your blanket smells faintly of cedar and smoke. And for the first time in your life, you realise staying dry isn't just about surviving the storm, it's about defeating the quiet rot that tries to grow while you're not paying attention. By this point, you're no longer surprised by the rain. You don't check the sky for a break. You don't ask when it'll stop. You just adjust your cloak, brush off the water, and carry on like it's background music. Which it is. The rain is the percussion section of this place, steady and constant. And yet, somehow, amidst all this moisture, this eternal drizzle, people still manage to look good. Not just functionally good, like, this keeps me alive, but stylishly good. And now you're finally seeing it. In the land of soaked everything, there is still such a thing as rainy fashion. Forget your modern ideas of what weatherproof clothing looks like. No neon ponchos or factory-sealed parkas. No plastic, no zippers. Instead, think elegance in texture, confidence in material, identity woven into every thread. Native people of rain-drenched regions didn't just dress to survive, they dressed to communicate. Rank, role, region, even mood. Take the capes, for instance. You've seen them on nearly everyone, worn over the shoulders like short cloaks, always a little stiff, always slightly glistening. They're made from long strips of cedar bark, softened, split, and then hand-woven into something that resembles straw but feels like armour. Bark capes aren't flashy in the traditional sense, but they command attention. The way they swing slightly as you walk, the way rain slides off in ribbons. And if you get close enough, you can see the decorative details. Dyed fibres, beads woven in near the collar, fringe on the edges shaped like rivergrass or feathers. And the hoods. Don't even get started on the hoods. Each one is a tiny architectural marvel. Some are conical, woven from tightly stitched spruce roots or grasses, with little lips at the front to keep water off the face. Others are looser, layered with fur or dog hair, oiled and sewn for maximum water deflection. A well-made rain hood here doesn't just keep you dry. It tells people who made it, what region you're from, and whether your family has good taste. Which apparently they do. One elder shows you a ceremonial garment that's brought out only for important occasions. A long cloak made of mountain goat wool, dyed deep indigo with accents of red and white shell beads. It's heavy, yes, but surprisingly warm and naturally water-resistant. The wool has been pounded, carded, and twisted so tightly that rain runs off it almost like canvas. But this isn't for everyday slogging through the woods. This is statement wear. Rain couture. You sit with a small group of weavers as they prep bark fibres for a new batch of cloaks. Their hands are steady, quick, and absolutely unbothered by the cold drizzle dripping from the awning. They explain that every strand has to be stripped at the right angle, soaked just long enough, then twisted into cord. It takes days to prep enough for a single garment, weeks if you want it decorated. Here's your quirky fringe fact. Some communities created status capes that were intentionally less waterproof, lighter, more decorative, with exaggerated fringe and patterns meant to flutter dramatically in the wind. Why? Because if you're important enough, you don't have to stay dry. You just have to look incredible doing whatever it is you're doing. Fashion apparently transcends practicality in every era. There's ongoing debate among ethnographers about how much of this dress was for function versus social signalling. Some argue that it was all about efficiency, stay dry, stay warm. Others point to intricate beadwork, shell inlays and woven motifs as clear signs of artistic expression and identity. The reality? Both. These garments were built for survival and for the stage of life. When your whole world is made of water, you learn to make waves. You're given a small project, helping prepare a headband made of cedar root and dyed porcupine quills. It's not much, but it's yours. You weave the pattern slowly, concentrating on the rhythm. Over, under, twist, tighten. There's a strange joy in the tactile simplicity of it. When it's done, it's slipped onto your head, and a younger weaver smiles. Now you don't just look like you belong, she says, you dress like it. And the footwear! Let's not forget that. Moccasins here aren't the thin, slipper-like things you may have imagined. They're thick, lined with fur and layered with waterproof wraparounds made from oiled hide or cedar bark. Some even have removable inserts made of moss or shredded bark for insulation. They're the original modular boots. Functional, beautiful, and just rugged enough to stomp a mud puddle like you mean it. At a communal meal that evening, you take in the full array of rainy season fashion. Every colour is earth-toned. Browns, blacks, soft reds, ochres, forest green. Nothing garish. Everything blends with the land. And yet the details shine. A twisted cord here, a shell accent there, an unusually shaped hood that arches slightly at the back like a raven's tail. The elegance is in the layering, the texture, the utility that doubles as expression. Someone tells you the story of a woman who once wooed her future husband by dyeing her cloak to match the bark of a tree he always stopped to rest beneath. She wore it one day, leaned against the trunk and waited. He almost missed her completely, but when he did spot her, he laughed so hard he dropped his basket of fish. They were married by spring. That's what rainwear does here. It blends, but it also speaks. It hides, but it also reveals. You begin to see it as an art form, not because it's flashy, but because it's real, alive, worn in, not built for perfection, but for continuance. As the rain falls and your freshly made headband soaks up the mist, you feel oddly proud. Not because you're dry, you aren't, but because now you understand the difference between being covered and being dressed for the rain. And when you walk back to the longhouse, hood up, cloak swinging, feet silent on the mossy trail, someone says, "Nice look." And for once, you believe them. You've stopped counting the days. The calendar in your head, if it ever existed, washed away somewhere around week 2 of the endless rain. Now you track time by the size of puddles, the softness of moss, the weight of your cloak in the morning. You know the rhythm of drips from the cedar eaves and the exact tone of squish your moccasins make when they've been drying too close to the smoke. What month is it? Doesn't matter. What matters is that it's still raining, and tonight you learn what it means to wait for the sun, and wait, and wait. How native people endured month after month of wet with spirit intact, sanity mostly unshaken, and hope surprisingly alive. It's around this time every year that the rain tests everyone, not just physically, but emotionally. The novelty's gone, the rituals have been repeated, the firewood stack is shrinking, and even the dogs have stopped pretending to like the weather. People don't say, "still raining" anymore, they just sigh with their eyes. You're told this season has many names. In some regions it's called the grey hunger, not because there's no food, but because the colourlessness eats at you. When the sky doesn't change, when everything is the same dull shade of wet bark and damp soil, your senses start to beg for something else. Anything. Light, colour, dryness. And this is where it gets interesting. Because instead of retreating into gloom, many native communities met this time with intention. They didn't wait for the sun passively. They prepared for it, made space for it. Sometimes literally, scrubbing floors, repainting tools, replacing worn mats. Not because they needed cleaning, but because ritual maintenance gave shape to shapeless days. You find yourself helping a group polish bone tools with fine sand. The tools aren't dull, but the action gives the hands something to do. People hum as they work, quiet tunes that repeat like mantras. One elder tells you that this is the season of remembering, a time when stories get told again, and again, and again, not because they've changed, but because you have. After dinner there's a long lull. No dancing, no ceremony, just quiet. The fire pops and people sit back, eyes heavy. But then someone asks softly, Tell the story of the two sons again. And just like that, the lull ends. The story is told, not dramatically, not for entertainment, but for comfort. A tale about a time when there were two suns in the sky, and people begged for shade. When one sun finally disappeared, they learned to appreciate the one that remained, even when it hid for a while. You begin to see that hope, here, isn't flashy. It doesn't come in big speeches or dramatic shifts. It comes in continuity, in showing up, in weaving another thread, in checking the firewood, in rubbing bare fat into your boots even if they'll just get soaked again tomorrow. Because resilience isn't loud, it's quiet, it's routine. It's that first moment in the morning when someone throws off their blanket, steps into the mud, and starts the fire again. Here's your strange but true fact for the night. Some tribes marked the return of the sun with sun-holding rituals, ceremonies where people would raise their hands to the east for several mornings in a row welcoming its eventual return, even if it couldn't be seen yet. A kind of trust fall into the future. Rain or not, the gesture was made. You start doing it too, one hand up every morning, just in case the sun is watching. There's debate among scholars about how deeply these rituals were tied to seasonal affective shifts. Was this practical psychology disguised as ceremony? Maybe. But honestly, does it matter? The result is the same. People stayed connected, grounded, even when the ground was nothing but cold mud. You begin noticing the small sun symbols carved into beams, woven into belts, etched on tools, circles with rays, spirals, not everywhere, but enough to catch the eye. They're reminders, you're told, not just of summer, but of balance, of the other half of the year, of the promise that the sky doesn't stay grey forever. One night, as you lie awake listening to rain chatter softly on the roof, someone walks past your mat and murmurs, 3 more moons. It takes a second before you realise they mean the return of the longer days, of warmer winds, of sunlight that actually touches your skin. They're counting just like you, not impatiently, just intentionally. You help a group make sun charms one day, simple loops of willow wrapped in yellow-dyed fibres. They're hung near the vents, where smoke and rain slip through. The belief? That the smoke will carry their shape into the clouds so the sun knows it's still welcome. You don't ask whether it works. That's not the point. The point is making room for the return before it even arrives. And when someone calls out late one afternoon, there's a break. Everyone runs. Not just steps outside, but actually runs. And sure enough, there it is, a patch of lighter grey among the clouds. Not blue, not sunshine, just slightly less miserable. But the mood shifts instantly. People lift their hoods. One woman actually takes off her cloak and raises her arms, laughing. "That's a sun," she says. Or at least its cousin. You believe her. Back in the longhouse, the fire burns brighter. Not hotter, just with more attention. People sit a little straighter. The stories are a little louder tonight. And you realise that the power wasn't in the sun's return. It was in the waiting. The way they waited. With purpose. With song. With motion. Even when nothing outside moved. As you fall asleep, the rain returns. Of course it does. But this time it sounds different. Softer. Less permanent. Like something on its way out. You close your eyes, palm facing east, just in case. It finally happens on a morning so unassuming you almost miss it. You're crouched beside the fire, blowing gently on a stubborn coal, when the air in the longhouse shifts, just slightly. A breath of something new filters in through the smoke hole. Warmer, drier, sharper somehow. And then, with no grand announcement, someone mutters the words that make your chest crack open like thawing ground. The sun's up. You stumble outside, half-dressed, bark cape dragging, blinking like a mole, and there it is. Not blazing, not glorious, but present. A thin beam of gold poking through a gap in the clouds. It strikes the side of the cedar longhouse, igniting the moss in pale yellow, and suddenly everything looks alive. The bark shines, the puddles glitter. A raven croaks like it's been waiting weeks to complain about the lighting. And just like that, the rain is over. Well, not over. It's still damp, and the clouds haven't exactly vanished. But that's not the point. The sun showed up. And in this part of the world, that's as sacred as any vision or omen. And now, as the warmth touches your cheek and the steam rises off your soaked cloak, you're ready to meet the rainkeepers of today, the people still holding these old secrets in their hands. You're taken to a carving shed tucked behind a grove of twisted pines. Smoke curls from a small chimney, and inside, a woman with silver-threaded hair is bent over a half-carved canoe. She doesn't stop when you walk in, just keeps shaving long curled ribbons of cedar from the hull. You notice her sleeves are rolled up, and her forearms are tattooed with delicate lines, symbols of her clan, her lineage, her work. This canoe isn't a replica. It's not for a museum. It's meant for the water, real rivers, real storms. She tells you she's one of the last in her family still carving canoes by hand. Not because no one cares, but because it takes a lifetime to learn, and not everyone's got the time anymore. She shows you the marks along the grain, the subtle swell that tells her where the tree once leaned toward the sun. She says you always carve with the memory of the tree in mind. If you don't, the canoe will never track right. You ask how long it'll take to finish. She shrugs. However long the water takes to tell me. Across the camp, a group of weavers is prepping cedar bark in silence. Their fingers move fast, splitting and twisting the fibres with practiced grace. They're making cloaks. Not for tourists, not for sale, but for ceremony. For the children who'll wear them next season when they come of age. You see them laughing as they work, occasionally flicking bark strands at each other. The rain still drips from the trees, but no one minds. These cloaks, like everything else here, are built for weather and wonder. One woman calls you over and hands you a bundle of fibres. Help or watch, she says. Your choice. You sit beside her, fumble through the first few knots, and eventually find a rhythm. Over, under, twist, tighten. The same motion that's held people dry and warm for thousands of years. You ask her what the hardest part is. She grins. Keeping the old stuff sacred and the new stuff honest. That afternoon, you visit a young man who makes modern waterproof gear using ancient techniques. Rain hoods sewn from recycled sailcloth, but shaped like the spruce root cones worn by his grandmother. He says he's trying to make gear for people who live on the land but also have to ride the bus. Cedar doesn't always cut it on asphalt, he laughs. But his stuff doesn't look like compromise. It looks like continuation. He shows you a design for a hybrid rain cape, half bark, half ripstop nylon, dyed with alder and iron. It's waterproof, breathable, and tells a story. He says the bark is from a tree felled during last winter's storm, the same one that knocked out half the power in the village. It's got fight in it, he adds. That's what we need. Here's your final fringe fact. In some communities today, elders teach rain resilience workshops, not just how to make gear, but how to live well in wet, how to think about rain, how to cook in fog, how to laugh when your tent leaks. It's cultural revival wrapped in practical knowledge. One elder calls it retraining people's brains to dance in puddles. There's a debate, of course, about authenticity, about tradition versus innovation. Some say the old ways should be preserved exactly as they were. Others argue that adapting them is the only way to keep them alive. But the people you meet don't seem worried. They're doing, carving, weaving, singing, building new longhouses with old designs and fireproof siding, layering culture like they lay a cedar bark, one tough, beautiful strand at a time, and maybe that's the most powerful thing of all. Not that they remember how to stay dry, but that they remember why it matters. Because rain isn't just water here, it's time, it's memory, it's grief and renewal and everything in between. And the knowledge that kept people dry for days in endless storms is still out there. Tucked into song, sewn into a cloak, curled into a canoe's hull, passed down in hands that still know the way cedar splits under a blade. You stand outside that evening, sun glowing faintly at the edge of the horizon. Not strong, but present. You tilt your face up. The rain stopped for now, but you know it'll return. It always does. And when it does, you'll be ready. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not dry, but ready. Because now you know the secret. You don't fear the rain, you dress for it, you build for it, and most importantly, you listen to it. And now, here you are, wrapped in warmth, dry in all the ways that count. The storm has passed, at least for now, and what lingers isn't wetness, but wisdom. You didn't just survive the rain, you became part of its rhythm. You learned how bark can be a barrier, how moss can be a sponge, how smoke and cedar are both shield and scent. You walked trails where feet whispered through fog, you ate food that could outlast a season of storms, and you sat beside fires that burned even when the skies cried for days. More than anything, you saw how native people, then and now, don't just endure the rain. They honour it. They weave it into their way of life, let it shape their homes, their tools, their songs and their stories. They don't try to conquer nature, they collaborate with it. The result? A culture that's not just weather-resistant, it's weather-wise, built not only to survive, but to stay rooted, grounded, unshaken. You carry that now. Maybe you're lying in bed with earbuds in, the fan humming like distant rain. Maybe the weather outside your window is bone dry, or maybe it's raining hard enough to shake the glass. Either way, you've been somewhere. You felt what it's like to wait for the sun and not lose hope, to stay dry in a world designed to test you. And that's no small thing. So close your eyes, feel the last embers of the fire, let the story settle like cedar smoke in your lungs. You're safe, you're ready, and when the storm returns, and it always does, you'll know exactly what to do.